Hey there, story lovers. This is Watch Harry, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Sirius Black escaped Azkaban early and raised Harry at Gringotts as the wealthiest rebel lord? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1. The night that didn't happen. The motorbike hit the outskirts of Godric's Hollow at midnight, and Sirius Black already knew something was wrong before he cut the engine. It wasn't the silence, though the village was too quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after something enormous has already finished happening. It wasn't the smoke threading up from the far end of the lane, pale against the October sky. It was the feeling, the one he'd had exactly 3 times in his life, when his mother burned his name off the family tapestry, when James told him Lily was pregnant, and now. A feeling like the world had pivoted on some invisible hinge and everything familiar was on the other side of it. He left the motorbike hovering at the edge of the lane and ran. The front of the Potter cottage was intact. That was almost worse, somehow, the hedges still trimmed, the garden gate standing open the way James always left it because he claimed the latch was broken and Lily claimed he just couldn't be bothered. The jack-o'-lantern on the step had burned down to a guttering orange mouth. Normal. Entirely, horrifically normal, except for the roof, which had been blown clean off one side of the house, and the dark that was coming out of the upper windows instead of light. Sirius went through the door at a dead run. He found James in the entrance hall. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop, because stopping meant acknowledging it, and he could not do that yet, he would not survive doing that yet, so he kept moving, up the stairs, following the smell of burnt wood and something electric, the aftermath of magic so powerful it had scorched the air itself. The door to the nursery was in splinters. The crib was on its side. And Lily was. He stopped then. He had to. She was curled on her side near the window, one arm still outstretched, the way you'd look if you'd thrown yourself in front of something. Her hair was spread across the floor like she'd just lain down for a rest. He stood there for what felt like a very long time and was probably 4 seconds, and then he heard the sound. Crying. Small, furious, alive crying. Harry was under the crib. Not in it, under it, half buried under a scorched blanket, his face scrunched and red with outrage rather than fear, a cut on his forehead tracking a thin line of blood down to his eyebrow. He was maybe 14 months old. He had James's hair, already sticking up in approximately 9 directions. When Sirius pulled the crib aside and picked him up, Harry grabbed a fistful of his jacket and didn't let go. "Yeah," Sirius said. His voice came out completely wrecked. "I've got you. I've got you." Harry stared up at him with Lily's eyes, that same particular shade of green, not quite emerald, more like the color of sunlight through a bottle, and made a sound that wasn't quite a word but was very clearly a complaint about the general situation. Sirius laughed, which was awful, which turned into something that wasn't quite laughing, which he stopped because he could hear things outside now. Voices. Someone shouting Dumbledore, he could hear that much. He stood in the ruins of the nursery with James's son in his arms and he thought, with total clarity, Peter did this. The thought was clean and cold and certain, the way only the truest things are. He'd had his suspicions, little things, misalignments, information that the Death Eaters had gotten too quickly, movements that didn't track. He'd said nothing because the alternative was unthinkable and he'd been wrong to find it unthinkable. Peter had been their secret keeper for 2 weeks. 2 weeks was all it had taken. He thought about what he was supposed to do next. He knew what he was supposed to do next. Get on the motorbike, track Peter down, and end it in whatever messy, public, rage-filled way seemed appropriate. The thought was very loud and very bright and it would feel extraordinary for approximately the amount of time it took to actually do it, and then Harry would be left with no one. James was dead. Lily was dead. Remus didn't know yet, and Sirius couldn't think about that without his chest doing something structural. Remus was half the world away on order business. Peter would be dead. And then it would just be Harry and a motorbike and the entire Ministry of Magic about to descend on Godric's Hollow. The voices outside were getting louder. He could hear Hagrid now, that unmistakable mountain of a voice, carrying up from the lane. Sirius looked down at Harry. Harry was watching him with an expression of grave, attentive calm that he would later recognize as his default expression in a crisis, the one that made people deeply uneasy because it looked wrong on someone so small. "Right," Sirius said quietly. "Change of plans." He was already moving before he'd fully decided, which was, he would later think, the only way he ever made the best decisions, fast, before the cautious part of his brain could talk him out of them. Down the stairs, past James, he touched his best friend's shoulder for just a moment, just a second, a pressure that was and wasn't a goodbye, and out the back, through the kitchen, into the garden where the back fence opened onto the old footpath through the fields. He had the Black family signet ring on his right hand. He'd worn it for years, hating it, hating everything it represented, the weight of a family he'd spent his adolescence trying to escape. But he'd never taken it off, because Regulus, who was also dead now, who died trying to undo the very mess that had killed James tonight, had made him swear not to, in the flat, practical voice their mother had never once managed to train out of him. "There are things in the old vaults, Siri. Things Mother doesn't know about. Things Father didn't know about. Things that go back to when our family was something worth being. Keep the ring. If it ever goes truly wrong, if you need sanctuary and you've nowhere else to turn, press the seal to any vault door in Gringotts and say the old words. The ones grandmother taught us. You remember them." He did remember them. He hadn't thought about them in years, but he remembered, because Regulus had asked him to and Sirius had never been able to refuse his brother anything, not really, not underneath all the shouting. He pressed the ring to the worn wood of the back gate and said the words, not English, not Latin, something older, something that tasted like iron and old stone on his tongue, and felt the magic recognize him. Not with warmth. With weight. Like something enormous that had been waiting had just turned its attention in his direction. The gate opened onto the path, which looked exactly as it always had, muddy and lined with October-bare hedges, except for the shimmer at its far end, the kind of shimmer that heat makes over summer roads but was here, tonight, ice-cold and precise. Sirius looked back at the cottage. He could see Hagrid's lamp moving in the lane at the front of the house. He could hear more voices, the pop-pop-pop of apparition, the ministry arriving to pick over the wreckage of everything he'd loved. Then he looked at Harry, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder with the boneless total trust of someone very small and very tired, and he walked through the shimmer and didn't look back. The passage took them to London, because all Black family magic eventually led to London. It was a law of the universe as inviolable as gravity. Specifically, it took them to a narrow alley off Diagon Alley proper, a place that smelled of old coin and hadn't changed since the 18th century, where the stones of the street were worn into gentle hollows by 300 years of feet. At the end of the alley stood a door. Not the grand marble entrance of Gringotts, this was a side door, iron and old, set flush into the stone wall without ceremony. The black seal was carved above the lintel, worn but present, a quartered shield with stars at 3 corners and something that might have been a serpent or might have been a wave at the 4th. Sirius pressed the ring to the door. The lock turned. He went in. The corridor beyond was lit by green-tinted lamps that burned without flame, the light cold and mineral and utterly without warmth. It smelled like deep stone and old paper and the particular, almost sweet smell of very old gold. A goblin stood at the far end of the corridor, and this was not a teller or a clerk or anyone in a service role. This goblin was old in the way that mountains are old, with a face like carved leather and eyes that caught the green light and threw it back with interest. He looked at Sirius. He looked at the ring. He looked at Harry. "Black," he said, and it was not a greeting exactly. More like an identification. The tone a geologist uses when he's just turned over a rock and found something worth examining. "The sanctuary clause," Sirius said. "I'm invoking it." "You have the right," the goblin said. "The ring is genuine and the words were spoken correctly." He tilted his head. "You are not the first Black to invoke it. You will recall that the clause requires a negotiation. I know. Sirius had read every word of the Black family grimoire he'd taken from Grimmauld Place at 16 and hidden in a safe house ever since, partly because Regulus had told him to and partly because even at 16 he'd understood that the family's power, the part worth keeping, was in its contracts, not its cruelty. I know what's required. I'm prepared to negotiate. Now? The goblin looked pointedly at Harry, who chose this moment to wake up, look around at the stone corridor and the green lights with an expression of great interest, and then reach out and try to grab the goblin's nose. The goblin caught Harry's hand with a precision that suggested long practice and held it for a moment, examining the tiny fingers with the focused attention of a jeweler assessing a stone. Something shifted in his expression, nothing so human as surprise, more like a recalibration. The child carries a mark, he said. I know. The lightning scar is not merely a wound. The magic in it is, he paused, which seemed to cost him something significant. It will require assessment. I know that too. Sirius met the goblin's eyes steadily. Can we do this sitting down? He's heavy. The goblin's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile and not quite not one. Come, he said, and turned, and led them deeper into the earth. The negotiation room was underground by 3 levels. Sirius could feel the weight of the city above him, which should have been claustrophobic but was instead oddly settling, like being buried in a good way, and furnished with a table of black stone that had been polished to a mirror shine and 2 chairs that were clearly designed for goblin proportions but which had been augmented by cushions with the resigned practicality of people who had dealt with the vertically overextended before. The goblin introduced himself as Ragnarok, which meant nothing to Sirius until Ragnarok said, with the flat precision of someone stating a mathematical fact, I am the High Director of Gringotts. I am also the current chief of the Goblin High Council. He sat down across the table and folded his hands. You should know who you are negotiating with. Sirius, who had settled Harry in his lap with the grimoire propped as a backrest, looked at Ragnarok for a long moment. In the Order of the Phoenix, there had been exactly 0 goblins, because Dumbledore had never thought to ask, which Sirius had thought was a staggering oversight and had said so at the time and been told it was complicated. He was beginning to understand that it was only complicated for people who thought of goblins as a support staff. Then you should know who you're negotiating with as well, Sirius said. Sirius Black. Last magically acknowledged Lord of the ancient and most noble House of Black. Godfather and sole magical guardian of Harry James Potter. He paused. And probably wanted by the Ministry of Magic in about 6 hours once someone notices I'm not at Godric's Hollow. We are aware of what happened tonight, Ragnarok said. News reaches us through the vaults before it reaches the streets. He looked at Harry again. The boy killed the Dark Lord. Something killed him, Sirius said. Voldemort went to Godric's Hollow himself, which means he was certain. And he failed. His hand moved unconsciously to cover Harry's back, the way you'd guard something breakable. I don't know what Lily did. I think it was something old. Something protective. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. We know what she did, he said. The magic she invoked has not been performed in 4 centuries. The goblins have records of it. Another pause. She made a sacrifice. Not metaphorically. The technical term in our oldest contracts is animus pro anima, a soul given in place of a soul. It creates a ward so specific to a single person that it is, for all practical purposes, unbreakable. He looked at the scar on Harry's forehead. He is, within the parameters of that ward, inviolable. Any attempt to kill him directly will rebound on the caster. Sirius stared at him. You know about this magic and you never, we shared it with no one, Ragnarok said, without apparent guilt. It was not ours to share. And no wizard ever asked us. The implication was exquisitely precise. Sirius took a breath. Then he said, I'm asking now. About everything. Tonight and going forward, I want to know everything Gringotts knows that's relevant to Harry's safety and my family's holdings. He held Ragnar's gaze. And I want to know what it would take for you to consider us, the House of Black and the House of Potter, as genuine political allies rather than account holders. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one outside in the street. This one had texture. You understand, Ragnar said slowly, that this has not been proposed by a wizard to the Goblin High Council in 312 years. I understand. You understand that the last time a wizard made such an overture, his own government had him removed from power within 2 years. I understand that too. Sirius shifted Harry, who had fallen back to sleep with his cheek squashed against the grimoire. I also understand that I currently have approximately nothing to lose, a great deal of Black family gold, and, based on what you've just told me about the ward, a child who is going to be genuinely very powerful and who I would very much like to have grow up knowing the difference between allies and servants. He paused. That's not a speech. I genuinely believe it. Ragnar regarded him for a long time. Long enough that a lesser person would have felt compelled to fill the silence. Sirius waited. He'd grown up in a house full of people who used silence as a weapon, and he'd learned early that the right response was to simply be comfortable being looked at. The Sanctuary Clause, Ragnar said finally, grants a Black family member refuge within our deepest vaults for a period of 1 year, after which the arrangement must be renewed or dissolved. During this time, we are obligated to maintain the fiction that no such arrangement exists, to any party, including the Ministry of Magic and Albus Dumbledore. He tilted his head. The clause was written by your ancestor Phineas Black II, who had reason to distrust both. Reasonable man, Sirius said. He was not, particularly, Ragnar said. But his contracts were excellent. He unclenched his hands and reached into his robes, drawing out a quill that was not a quill, it was a stylus. Sirius realized, a goblin-make instrument for drafting binding agreements, the kind that wrote in something more permanent than ink. I propose we draft an initial framework tonight. Sanctuary for 1 year to begin. Political discussions to begin within the month. He looked at Harry. And the child will require a full magical assessment when he is older. The mark on his forehead, there is something within it that should be examined. What kind of something? Ragnar's expression did not change. The kind that suggests the Dark Lord may not have been entirely destroyed tonight. He said it calmly, with the detachment of someone reporting a weather pattern rather than a catastrophe. I could be wrong. I am not, in my experience, wrong. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then he said, all right. Let's build something. The stylus moved. The first lines of the contract went down in deep, permanent black, and the stone room smelled briefly of lightning. It was nearly 4 in the morning when they were done, and the contract was 12 pages long and had 3 codicils and 1 addendum that Ragnar had added in Goblin script and Sirius had insisted on having translated before he signed, which Ragnar had accepted without comment and which Sirius understood to be some kind of test that he had passed. A younger goblin, introduced only as Griphook, in the tone of someone expecting the name to mean something, arrived to show him to the Black family suite, which was what they called the chambers that opened off the deepest vault corridor and which had not been occupied in 60 years. They were spacious in a particular underground way, all carved stone and low ceilings and walls hung with tapestries that were far older than anything in Grimmauld Place. The stone had been warmed by some magic Sirius didn't recognize. The air smelled of cool earth and, faintly, of beeswax. There was a bed. It was enormous and black-framed and had clearly been made for Black family dimensions, which ran to the tall and angular. Sirius laid Harry down on it and stood looking at him for a moment, the dark hair, the lily-green eyes closed now in sleep, the tiny hand still loosely fisted, and felt the full weight of the night land on him all at once, the way it hadn't been able to while he was moving. James was dead. Lily was dead. He sat down on the edge of the bed and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and stayed very still for a while. Not crying, exactly. Something else. Something with no name. That was what happened when grief and rage and love all occupied the same space at once and none of them had anywhere to go. Harry stirred, made a small questioning sound, and one hand found Sirius's knee and held on with that same instinctive grip from the nursery. Sirius exhaled. Looked at the carved stone ceiling. Thought about Peter Pettigrew, alive somewhere above him in the city, probably terrified, probably running, possibly already beyond reach. The rage was still there. It would always be there. But it could wait. Peter had been waiting since 1971 to betray them, and he could wait a while longer. Sirius had more important things to do with his time now. He lay down on the bed next to Harry, on top of the covers because he was still in his jacket and boots and didn't have the energy for more than that, and stared at the ceiling. "I'm going to do this right," he told Harry, "or possibly just the ceiling. I don't know exactly what that means yet. But I'm going to figure it out." Harry, deeply asleep, offered no response, but his hand stayed on Sirius's arm. Outside, London turned, and the ministry scrambled, and Hagrid carried a blanket down a lane in Godric's Hollow, and somewhere in the smoke-scented night, Albus Dumbledore sat down at his desk and began composing a letter to Petunia Dursley, entirely unaware that the chess piece he was reaching for had already moved itself off the board. 3 days later, an owl arrived. Sirius had expected this. He hadn't expected it quite this quickly, but then, Dumbledore was Dumbledore. The owl was schoolpost white and extremely officious looking, and it had navigated the Gringotts wards, which were not, technically, supposed to be navigable by external post, with an ease that meant either Dumbledore had magics that predated the ward system or he'd spent the last 72 hours specifically working on the problem. Sirius took the letter. He turned it over. The Hogwarts seal, pressed in purple wax, with Dumbledore's cramped, careful handwriting on the front, Sirius Black, wherever he may be. He'd give the old man points for style. He opened it. "Dear Sirius, I find I am writing to you rather than sending orders because I believe, and I may be wrong, as I have been wrong before in ways I am still cataloguing, that you are not the threat you have been painted as in the last 72 hours. I have heard certain things from certain sources that I suspect will eventually exonerate you, though exoneration from the Ministry of Magic is a slow and political process and I would not advise banking on it in the near term. I write to tell you that I know you have Harry. I write to ask that you bring him to a place of safety. There are several I can offer, where he can be properly protected. Voldemort is not destroyed. He is diminished, but not gone, and there are those remaining who would use Harry as a symbol or a target or both. I will not threaten or coerce. I am asking. Yours, Albus Dumbledore. P.S. The Potter family vault remains sealed and secure. I want you to know I have not touched it." Sirius read it twice. Then he turned it over, and on the blank back of the parchment, he wrote a reply, in his own handwriting, which was large and slightly impatient-looking. "Albus, Harry is safe. He is with me. He will remain with me. I note that a place of safety is not a specific address, and that your definition of safety and mine have, historically, differed on the question of who gets to make decisions about Harry's life. I think we both know where you were planning to send him, and I think you know what I think of that plan. I am not hiding. I am building. When I have something worth showing you, I'll be in touch. Sirius Black. P.S. If you send orders I will consider it a declaration, and I will respond accordingly. I mean this kindly." He sent the owl back. Then he went to find Griphook, because there were 7 Black family vaults he hadn't opened in 15 years and a goblin named Ragnarok who had promised to show him everything his family had that was worth knowing, and he had a great deal of work to do before Harry was old enough to understand any of it. The boy was still asleep in the carved stone room below, surrounded by 15 centuries of Black family gold and a small stuffed stag that Sirius had conjured from one of Lily's old scarves and which Harry seemed to have adopted without question. It was, Sirius thought, climbing the corridor stairs toward the lamplit negotiation rooms, the beginning of something. He wasn't entirely certain what. But it felt, for the first time since he'd cut his motorbike's engine at the edge of Godric's Hollow and felt the world pivot on its hinge, like the right thing. He was moving with purpose. He was building. He was, for the first time in his life, exactly what the Blacks had always wanted him to be, and he was using every bit of it against them. The last thing that happened that night, the night that hadn't happened, the night he'd chosen a different story for, was small. Worth noting for the same reason small things always are, which is that they compound. Ragnarok had told him, in the flat, geological way he had of delivering information, that the Ministry of Magic had already named him a suspect. That Hagrid had told the first Auror on the scene that Sirius had lent him the motorbike, which was both true and immediately suspicious looking. That a neighbor 3 streets over had heard a motorbike engine cutting out near the Hollow at approximately midnight. That Peter Pettigrew, clever, cowardly, always 3 steps ahead Peter, had apparently turned up at an Auror station in Manchester missing a finger and raving about how Sirius Black had betrayed the Potters. Missing a finger. Already. He'd cut it off himself and staged his own death before Sirius had even finished reading Dumbledore's letter. Sirius sat with this information for a moment, and then he put it away in the part of his mind where he kept things that required patience rather than action, and he made a note, not on paper, in the way the Blacks always kept their most important records, which was in memory and in contract, that when the time came, Peter Pettigrew would answer for what he'd done. Not tonight. Tonight there was a child asleep downstairs with his father's hair and his mother's eyes and the weight of a war on a forehead not yet big enough to understand what it was carrying. Tonight that was enough. Tonight that was everything. The corridor lights burned green and steady, deep in the earth, and above them London slept, and the Ministry scrambled, and the Wizarding world celebrated a victory it didn't fully understand over a threat it wasn't finished with, and a man sat in a goblin-carved chair 3 levels underground and began, methodically and with great determination, to build something worth defending. Chapter 2, Gold and Goblin Kind. The first thing Harry ever broke with magic was a ceiling. He was 2 years and 4 months old, and he'd been placed in the middle of the negotiation room floor with a set of goblin-carved wooden blocks while Sirius and Ragnarok finalized the 3rd codicil of their expanding political framework, and everything was going well until Griphook walked past the doorway and Harry decided, with the absolute conviction of someone who has never once been told no, that he wanted to see what was on the high shelf above the door. The shelf, and its contents, which included 3 glass-sealed contracts, a bronze assessment orb, and a lamp, came down. So did a significant portion of the ceiling plaster. Harry was fine. He was sitting in a small cloud of white dust with an expression of complete satisfaction, holding the assessment orb, which had cracked open and was humming a single clear note. Ragnarok looked at the ceiling. Then at Harry. Then at Sirius. The ward is not simply protective, Ragnarok said, in the tone of someone revising a previous hypothesis. It amplifies. Great, said Sirius. That's great. Harry, put that down. Harry put it down. Then he looked up at the hole in the ceiling with an expression that meant he was thinking about doing it again. No, Sirius said. Harry looked at him. The word no was new, introduced only recently, and Harry's relationship with it was still in the skeptical evaluation stage. Absolutely not, Sirius confirmed. Harry picked up a wooden block instead and went back to stacking. Ragnarok watched this exchange with the focused attention he brought to everything, and then made a note in the small ledger he kept at his left hand, which Sirius had learned to regard as the goblin equivalent of an eyebrow raise. He'll need training, Ragnarok said. Early. Before instinct and intention get confused. I know. Sirius looked at the hole in the ceiling. I'll pay for the repairs. You already are. The black vaults cover maintenance costs as per Clause 7. Ragnarok closed his ledger. The child needs structure, Lord Black. Not restriction, structure. There is a difference. I know the difference, Sirius said, a little sharply. Then, because Ragnarok's expression hadn't changed but his ledger had opened again, I grew up in a house full of restriction with no structure whatsoever. I'm aware of what that produces. Indeed. Ragnarok looked at him steadily. And yet you are here, which suggests you survived it. Barely, Sirius said. And with significant collateral damage. He picked Harry up off the floor, redistributed him onto one hip, and looked at the high shelf that wasn't there anymore. He thought about his mother's voice, all those years, crisp and cold and entirely certain it knew best. He thought about the tapestry in the drawing room at Grimmauld Place, the names burned off it like corrections in a draft. He thought about what Regulus had looked like the last time Sirius had seen him, standing in the doorway of that terrible house with his Hogwarts trunk at his feet and his expression perfectly composed in the way that meant he was working very hard not to let it be anything else. Harry grabbed his ear. Yes, all right, Sirius said. I'm paying attention. The suite they lived in expanded over the following months, the way things do when you have both the gold and the determination. Ragnarok had offered the Black family chambers as they stood, which was essentially a series of carved stone rooms with excellent structural integrity and all the warmth of a very old museum. Sirius spent the first 6 months quietly making them livable, not luxury, though the Black vaults could have funded any level of luxury he cared to specify, but home, which is a different architectural challenge entirely. He put down rugs, the heavy kind that eat sound and make winter floors survivable. He found a rocking chair in the vault inventory, buried under 2 centuries of accumulated Black family objects, and cleaned it off and put it in the room that became Harry's. The tapestries came down from the walls. They were beautiful, technically, but most of them depicted things that Sirius had no interest in. Harry's first visual education including, such as a Black ancestor executing someone who seemed to have offended him at a dinner party. He replaced them with maps. Enormous, detailed, extraordinary maps, the Wizarding world and the Muggle world both, the deep geography of Britain, the underwater charts that the goblins kept of Gringotts' full extent, which was considerably larger than any wizard had ever been told and reached, in places, out under the North Sea. Harry loved the maps. Before he could read he would stand in front of them and point at things and demand explanations, and Sirius would pick him up and tell him what he was pointing at, and the information went in and stayed in the way it does with children who are genuinely interested rather than merely obedient. The goblins were, in the aggregate, cautious about Harry. Not unkind, goblins were precise rather than warm, which was different from cold, but watchful, the way you are around a thing whose nature you haven't fully assessed. Griphook was assigned as their primary contact and eventually developed something that Sirius suspected was genuine affection for Harry, expressed in the uniquely goblin way of bringing him progressively more interesting things to examine and watching his reactions with close professional interest. The assessment orb that Harry had cracked open at 2 had, according to Ragnarok, registered a magical potential that put it in the top tier of the scale, which ran from 1 to 12 and which most Hogwarts graduates landed in the 4 to 6 range. Harry had pegged the meter at 11 before it cracked, which Ragnarok attributed partly to the ward and partly to whatever the scar was doing, and partly, and this he said with the considered honesty of someone who found the truth more useful than comfort, to genetics. James Potter had been an 8. Lily Evans Potter had been a 10. And Voldemort? Sirius asked. Also 11, Ragnarok said. Before his various self-modifications. So Harry is, potentially beyond our measurement capacity, Ragnarok said. Which is why early training is not a suggestion. The training started at 3, which Sirius had initially thought was too young and which Harry rapidly demonstrated was, if anything, slightly late. It was Griphook who designed the first exercises, based on goblin methods for their own children, adapted with characteristic pragmatism for the differences in human magical physiology. The principle was simple: don't try to control the magic. Teach the child to know it first. To feel its shape and weight the way you'd learn to know your own hand before you picked up a tool. Harry took to this the way some children take to water, not learning it so much as recognizing something he already was. By 3.5 he could call objects to him without the ceiling coming down. By 4 he could send them back. By 4.5 he had worked out, entirely on his own, that you could affect not just the object but the space around it, and had used this insight to rearrange an entire shelf of goblin ledgers while Griphook's back was turned, placing them in a different order that Harry considered superior and which Griphook, after a long silence, had admitted was actually a more efficient organizational system. "He has your instinct for creative application," Ragnarok told Sirius. "And his mother's systematic thinking," Sirius said, watching Harry through the observation window in the training room as he carefully, methodically worked through a focus exercise involving a set of small silver spheres that were enchanted to resist movement. Harry wasn't fighting the resistance. He was working with it, finding the angles. His tongue stuck out slightly when he was concentrating, which was pure James, and occasionally he'd make a small sound of satisfaction when something worked, which was something Sirius had never heard anyone else do and suspected was entirely original. "He's happy," Sirius said. It came out quieter than he'd intended. Ragnarok didn't say anything. But the ledger didn't open either. Sirius's own days during these years had a shape he hadn't expected and wouldn't have predicted for himself. Mornings were Harry's, training, maps, the reading that started early because Harry seemed to grasp almost immediately that books were where the interesting information was kept and wanted access to them with a persistence that left Sirius both proud and exhausted. Afternoons were business, which turned out to be enormous in scope and genuinely fascinating in the way that anything is fascinating when you approach it as a problem rather than a duty. The Black family holdings were vast and largely mismanaged, which was what happened when the people responsible for managing them had spent several generations more interested in blood purity ideology than financial strategy. There were properties, investments, business interests, and political contracts across 3 continents, many of them dormant, some of them actively counterproductive, a handful that were, on closer examination, brilliant and had been forgotten in the general decline of the family's better instincts. He spent the first year simply learning what he had. Ragnarok was invaluable here. Goblins kept better records of wizard family assets than the wizards themselves, because the gold passed through Gringotts regardless of what the family was doing, and Ragnarok had a complete picture of the Black holdings that Sirius's mother had never possessed. The Potter vaults, which Harry would inherit on his 17th birthday, were even larger. "Larger than the Blacks?" Sirius asked. "Significantly," said Ragnarok. The Potter family was old money and quiet about it. Discreet wealth. The Black family, by contrast, was loud about theirs. "You have no idea," Sirius said. He began making changes. Carefully, strategically, in ways that wouldn't attract immediate ministry attention but that would, over time, shift the balance of financial power in the wizarding world in ways that would make certain things easier later. He reinvested the dormant holdings. He renegotiated several expired contracts in terms more favorable to all parties. He reached out, through carefully chosen intermediaries, to other old families who had reason to distrust the ministry's current direction. Not all of them shared his politics, but all of them shared his understanding that the ministry was unreliable and that self-sufficiency was worth investing in. And he began, quietly, to lay the legal groundwork for his own exoneration, because he was not willing to raise Harry in hiding forever and Peter Pettigrew was still out there somewhere, and both of these facts required resolution. The ministry had declared him a fugitive. Specifically, Sirius Black, suspected Death Eater, suspected betrayer of the Potters, suspected killer of 12 Muggles and 1 Peter Pettigrew, escaped capture. The official story was that he'd been arrested and sent to Azkaban, which, for the first 6 months, had been a convenient fiction that Sirius had allowed to persist because it made people stop looking for him. When the records finally caught up with reality, the story became escaped before transfer, which was bureaucratically embarrassing and resulted in an increased bounty and several interdepartmental memos that Ragnarok had obtained through channels Sirius chose not to examine too closely. "They can't enter Gringotts," Ragnarok reminded him, when Sirius expressed concern about the bounty. "Not without a formal international treaty violation, which would require a majority vote in both the Wizengamot and the Goblin High Council. The Goblin High Council has not voted in favor of anything the Wizengamot wanted since 1752. What happened in 1752? We were promised something we did not receive. We have been precise about our cooperation since then. Ragnarok's expression conveyed millennia of institutional memory. "You are safe within these walls, Lord Black. As is the boy." "I know," Sirius said. "I just don't want to be safe here forever." When Harry was 5, Sirius told him about his parents. He'd been preparing for this conversation since the beginning, in the way that people prepare for things they know will be hard, thinking about it, adjusting the approach, revising the words, and ultimately finding that none of the preparation was what was actually needed, which was just to sit down on the floor of the map room with his godson and tell the truth. Harry listened with his characteristic attentive gravity. He sat cross-legged with his hands in his lap and watched Sirius's face in the way he had when he was processing something important, not interrupting, not reacting visibly, just taking it in. Sirius told him about James first. The pranks, the motorbike, the way he laughed, too loud, always too loud, the laugh of someone who'd found something genuinely funny and wasn't interested in being dignified about it. He told him about Lily, the sharpness of her, the way her magic felt when she was angry, like the air before lightning, and the way she could pick apart a problem with the kind of focused precision that made everyone around her feel slightly slow. He told him about Hogwarts, about the Marauders, about a friendship that had been, for the better part of a decade, the defining fact of his life. Then he told him about the night. Straightforwardly, without softening it, because Harry deserved the actual story. He said Peter's name without flinching. He said what Peter had done. He said that Peter was still out there somewhere, and that this was unfinished business, and that they would finish it. Harry was quiet for a moment when he was done. Then he said, "The stag. The one you made from Mum's scarf." "Yes," Sirius said. "Is that why it's a stag?" Sirius nodded. Harry picked up the little stuffed animal. He'd carried it everywhere for 3 years, until it was bald in patches and its button eyes had been replaced twice by goblin craftworkers who'd done the repairs with entirely excessive attention to detail, and looked at it for a moment. "Dad would have liked it here," Harry said. "Not a question. An assessment. The maps, and the gold, and all the goblins. He would have thought it was brilliant." "He would have thought it was absolutely brilliant," Sirius agreed, his voice steady with an effort he didn't show. "And Mum would have wanted to understand how all the wards worked." Harry set the stag down carefully. "So she could make them better." "Within about a week," Sirius said. "She'd have had Ragnarok explaining the full enchantment structure by the 3rd day and she'd have spotted 3 improvements by the 4th. Harry smiled, not the polite smile he used with people he'd just met, but the real one, the one that briefly looked so like James that Sirius had to look away for a moment. "I want to learn the wards," Harry said. "Not just the training exercises. The actual ward structure. Griphook says some of them are 500 years old." "He's right. Some of them are older." "Can I?" "Harry," Sirius said, "you can learn anything you want in this building. That's the whole point." Griphook began teaching him the wards at 5.5. It was not, technically, a curriculum that had ever been taught to a human child, but Griphook approached this with the same pragmatic flexibility he brought to everything, which was to say that he found what worked and discarded what didn't with absolute efficiency. Harry learned in the way that occasionally terrified people who were used to teaching. He didn't just absorb, he integrated, weaving new information into existing frameworks with an instinctive architectural quality that meant he regularly arrived at conclusions Griphook hadn't yet articulated. "He reasons ahead," Griphook reported to Sirius, in the flat tones of someone who was professionally disquieted. "Is that a problem? It requires different instruction." Griphook considered this. "Instead of teaching him what we know, I find I must explain why we know it. He doesn't accept received wisdom." "No," Sirius said, with the specific pride of someone watching a trait they're responsible for take root. "He really doesn't." The deeper they went into the ward structure, the more Harry seemed to feel the building around him, not metaphorically, but physically. He'd stop sometimes in the middle of the corridors and press his hand against the wall, and Sirius had learned that this meant he was listening to something in the stone, some vibration of the old enchantments, and that interrupting him in these moments was counterproductive. The wards have memory, Harry told him once, hand flat against a wall deep in the corridor that ran beneath the black vaults. He was 6. Not like people. More like, they remember what they've protected. What's been kept here? Goblins believe the same thing, Griphook said, appearing around the corner with the punctuality that Sirius had stopped finding eerie. Stone holds intention. That is why the oldest wards are the strongest. Not because the magic was more powerful then. Because the intention behind them was clearer. Harry looked at Griphook. Is that why the ward my mum made for me is so strong? Griphook met his eyes. Yes, he said. That is exactly why. When Harry was 7, 2 things happened that changed the shape of what they were building. The first was that Dumbledore came to Gringotts. Not to the vault entrance, not through the main doors, he arrived at the side door, the one with the black seal, which meant he knew about the sanctuary clause, which meant his sources were better than Sirius had given him credit for. He did not get past the door. Ragnarok had seen to that with his usual quiet thoroughness. But the letter he sent in with his owl was different from the first one, 6 years earlier. Less asking. More acknowledging. Sirius, I have been patient because you asked me to be, and because I have spent 6 years trying to determine whether my instinct, that you are doing something right, even if it is not what I would have done, is correct. I believe it is. I also believe we are both intelligent enough to know that the war is not over, and that there will come a point where what you are building and what I am trying to maintain will need to interface with each other. I am not asking for Harry. I am asking for a conversation. At a time and place of your choosing. Albus Sirius sat with this letter for 3 days. Then he went to find Harry, who was in the ward corridor doing something with the junction points of 2 overlapping enchantments that Griphook had said was theoretically impossible and which Harry was doing anyway. Dumbledore wants to talk, Sirius said. Harry looked up from the floor, where he'd been sitting cross-legged with both hands on the stones, tracing the lines of the ward structure. What did you say? I haven't said anything yet. Sirius sat down on the floor beside him. What do you know about Dumbledore? Headmaster of Hogwarts. Most powerful wizard in Britain, probably. Defeated Grindelwald in 1945. Fought Voldemort to a standstill in the 70s, which is basically everyone else he fought. Harry paused. He left me at my aunt's house. He was going to, Sirius said. He never got the chance. Would it have been bad? Sirius thought about Petunia Dursley, who had not replied to a single letter in 6 years and had sent one howler in 1982 addressed to that criminal lunatic which had said, in screaming terms, that she wanted nothing to do with any of it and never had. He thought about the house in Surrey, which he'd driven past once on the motorbike, needing to see it. Small, neat, curtained windows. The kind of house that kept things out. Yes, he said. Harry nodded, processing this. Tell him we'll talk when I'm 10, he said. That gives us 3 more years, and I want to finish the ward study before anything else gets complicated. Sirius stared at his godson, who was 7 years old and had just deferred a meeting with Albus Dumbledore because it conflicted with his study schedule, and felt a profound, specific, slightly incredulous love. All right, he said. I'll tell him 3 years. He sent the letter. Dumbledore replied the next day, with a single line, I will be here. The second thing that happened was Remus. Sirius had been composing letters to Remus for 6 years and sending none of them. He knew where Remus was. Ragnarok's information networks were not limited to financial matters, and he knew that Remus believed him guilty, because Remus had been told the same story as everyone else and Sirius had not reached out to contradict it because in the early years he'd been too raw and then he'd been too busy and then, honestly, he'd been afraid, in the specific way you're afraid of things that matter enormously. He wrote the letter on a Tuesday evening while Harry slept, and he sent it before he could revise it into uselessness. Moony, I know what you think I did. I know why you think it. You're wrong. I can prove it. But I understand if you need more than a letter from a man you think is a murderer. Harry is alive and well and currently redesigning the ward structure of the deepest vaults of Gringotts for fun. He has James's hair and Lily's brain, and he asked me last week how fast a broomstick can go, and I don't know if that made me sad or happy or just completely undone, so probably all three. If you want to see him, and me, come to the side door of Gringotts, the one off the alley. Bring something that proves it's you. You know what I mean. Padfoot he sent it, not knowing if Remus would come, or write back, or simply disappear further, the way he'd always been able to disappear when things hurt too much. Remus arrived 4 days later. He'd knocked chocolate on his jumper and his hair had gone early gray in the way that lycanthropy did, and he stood in the doorway of the sitting room looking at Sirius like he was something he'd thought was impossible to see again. He brought a piece of parchment that said Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs in the handwriting they'd all developed together at 13. Sirius said, "Wormtail's alive. He framed me. I know where he isn't, which is dead, but we'll work on where he is." Remus sat down very carefully. He said, "Tell me everything." And Harry appeared in the doorway in his nightclothes, looked at Remus with the assessing gravity of someone who had heard quite a bit about this specific person over the years, and said, "You're Moony. Padfoot says you knew my mum better than almost anyone." Remus looked at Harry for a long moment. His expression did the complicated thing that Sirius had watched happen to almost every person who met Harry properly for the first time, the looking for James, the finding him, and then the something else underneath it, which was Harry himself. "She was extraordinary," Remus said. "She corrected my potions essays for 3 years and never once made me feel stupid about it." Harry came into the room and sat on the arm of Sirius's chair. "Can you stay?" he asked. Remus looked at Sirius. Sirius spread his hands. "I have a very large underground apartment and more gold than anyone should reasonably have," Sirius said. "Stay. For how long?" Remus asked. "Until it makes sense to leave," Sirius said. Remus stayed. The years settled into a rhythm after that, a good one, the kind that you don't appreciate while it's happening because it feels ordinary and you only understand it was extraordinary later. Remus took over the theoretical magical education, which he approached with the organized, passionate intensity of someone who had always been a far better teacher than his circumstances had allowed. Sirius handled the political and financial business of the House of Black, and Harry's practical training, and the growing network of allies they were building with the patience and strategy of people who understood that the real war was not over and that preparation was the only honest response to that knowledge. Griphook remained Harry's primary instructor in goblin craft and ward theory, and between him and Remus and Sirius, Harry received an education that was wider and deeper and stranger than anything Hogwarts offered, taught by people who actually knew things rather than people who knew the curriculum. He was happy. Genuinely, specifically, visibly happy, the kind of happy that comes from being known and loved and intellectually stretched and physically safe, which is not a complicated recipe but is one that surprisingly few people ever get. On the morning of his 8th birthday, Sirius took him to the Black family treasury, not the main vault, but the deep room where the oldest objects were kept, the ones that predated the current family by centuries and which the Blacks had merely been the most recent custodians of, and let him walk through it. Harry walked slowly, reading the tags on things, occasionally reaching out to touch and then drawing his hand back when the magic resistance pushed back. He stopped in front of a mirror, oval, brass-framed, with a surface that showed not the room but something deeper, a darkness that had stars in it, or things like stars. "What's this?" he asked. "Family heirloom," Sirius said. "Very old. Phineas III brought it back from somewhere. The records just say East, which is not enormously helpful. It shows, no one's ever been entirely sure what it shows." Harry looked into it. His reflection looked back from the darkness, and then the reflection smiled in a way Harry wasn't smiling, which should have been unsettling but which Harry received with calm interest. "It shows what you're going to need," Harry said. "Not what you want. What you're actually going to need." Sirius looked at the mirror. His own reflection, in the darkness, was standing next to Harry's, and it looked settled. Sure of itself. Nothing like the boy who'd stood in that nursery on the worst night of the world. "How do you know that?" he asked. "It just told me," Harry said simply, and walked on. Chapter 3, The Education of Harry Blackpotter. The ex-Auror's name was Cassian Voss, and he arrived on a Thursday with a split lip, a carpetbag that clinked, and a letter of introduction from Ragnarok that described him as a practitioner of unconventional but statistically effective methodology, which was the most diplomatic sentence Sirius had ever read. Voss was 40-something, lean in the way people get when they've been in the field too long, with hands that moved constantly, not nervously, but with the restless precision of someone whose body had been trained to never fully stand down. He had the kind of face that was impossible to place precisely because it wasn't quite any one thing, which Sirius recognized as a professional quality rather than an accident. He'd resigned from the Auror office 6 years ago under circumstances that Ragnarok's notes described as a difference of institutional philosophy, and which Sirius, after reading the actual file, understood meant that Voss had refused to close a case that pointed at the wrong people. He stood in the sitting room and looked at Harry, who looked back with the same level attention he gave everything new. "You're the godfather," Voss said to Sirius, without looking away from Harry. "Yes. He's 9. 9 and 4 months. What does he know?" "More than you'd expect," Sirius said. "Less than he will." Voss nodded once, as though this was a satisfactory answer. Then he looked at Harry directly. "Can you duel?" "No," Harry said. "I've done combat exercises but not actual dueling." "Can you run?" Harry tilted his head. "From what?" Something shifted in Voss's expression, not a smile exactly, but the precursor to one. "Good answer," he said. "We'll start tomorrow." Voss's methodology, unconventional or otherwise, was this: he did not teach spells first. He taught decision-making. The first 2 weeks were almost entirely physical, not in a punishing way, but in the way of someone who understood that magic was embodied, that the body was the instrument and an undertrained instrument produced muddy magic regardless of innate power. Running, yes, but also climbing and swimming and the particular balance exercises that goblin trainers used, which looked simple and were not. Harry did all of it without complaint and with the focused attention he brought to everything, and by the end of the second week Voss had shifted to something else. "Scenario," Voss said, sitting across from Harry at the training room table. Sirius was in the corner, ostensibly reviewing contract documents and genuinely watching everything. "You're in a hallway. 2 wands pointing at you. Both belong to people you know. One of them is being controlled. How do you decide which one to disarm?" Harry thought about it. "You look at their feet," he said. Voss waited. "When people are under the imperious curse, they stand differently," Harry continued. "Their weight is forward because something external is directing their movement. It's compensating for the person's natural resistance. Feet tell you more than faces because faces can be controlled easier than weight distribution." He paused. "Also the hands. Controlled movement is slightly delayed at the wrist." Voss was quiet for a moment. "Where did you learn that?" "Remus told me about the imperious curse and what it felt like resisting it." Harry's voice didn't change, but something moved through it briefly. "And I read the St. Mungo's case files from the trials. The ones that had physical descriptions." "Those are sealed," Voss said. "From the ministry," Harry said. "Not from Gringotts." Voss looked at Sirius. Sirius turned a page of his contract documents. "All right," Voss said, and moved on to the next scenario, and the one after that, and Harry answered each of them with the same combination of theoretical grounding and lateral thinking that made Voss push harder each time, not to find his limit exactly but to find the shape of what he was working with. In the evenings Voss would come to the sitting room with a glass of whatever Sirius was drinking and they would talk, the way adults who've been through difficult things talk when there are no children immediately present, honestly, with the particular shorthand of people who've both seen the inside of the ministry's institutional dysfunction and come out specifically unimpressed. "He's not like anyone I've trained," Voss said one night, in the way of a professional observation rather than a compliment. "I know. It's not just the power. Lots of powerful kids can't think." He turned his glass in his hands. "He thinks around things. I give him a scenario and he's already looking at the walls of the scenario before I've finished describing it." "His mother was like that," Sirius said. "And his father?" "His father thought through things," Sirius said. "Fast and straight through, like there was only one direction and everything else just needed to get out of the way." He looked at the glass in his own hand. "Harry got both." Voss nodded slowly. "There's something else," he said. "The scar. I've seen it do something twice during training. When he's under pressure, real pressure, not controlled exercise pressure, it reacts. Like a feedback loop that hasn't been properly closed." "Ragnarok knows about it," Sirius said. "What does Ragnarok say?" "That something survived that shouldn't have." Sirius kept his voice steady. "And that we'll need to deal with it eventually." Voss was quiet for a moment. "How does Harry know?" "He doesn't. Not the full picture." Sirius set his glass down. "I'll tell him when there's something concrete to tell. Right now it's theoretical." "Theoretical things have a way of arriving," Voss said. "I know," Sirius said. "That's why we're doing this." Remus had discovered, in the year since his arrival, that teaching Harry required a complete reimagining of pedagogy, which he found genuinely delightful rather than frustrating, because Remus Lupin had been teaching himself things in difficult circumstances since childhood and had developed a deep personal fondness for problems that required creative solutions. The standard magical curriculum, the one that Hogwarts followed, organized by year and subject and leading toward a set of examinations designed to produce competent, moderately imaginative practitioners, was, in Remus's considered view, fine. It was fine. It produced fine wizards who could do the fine things that the magical world's fine institutional structures required. Harry was going to eat it alive inside a week, which meant that preparing him for Hogwarts required simultaneously mastering the curriculum and building so far beyond it that the curriculum wouldn't even register as a challenge. So Remus taught him the theory behind the theory. Not just how spells worked, but why they worked, the actual magical mechanics, the relationship between intent and expression, the physics of enchantment, the history that the official histories skipped because it was complicated or embarrassing or both. He taught him in 3 languages because magical texts worth reading existed in 3 languages minimum, and Latin wasn't always sufficient. He taught him potions the way Lily had taught him, not as a recipe but as a chemistry, a conversation between ingredients, and Harry took to it with the same instinctive feeling for materials and reaction that had made Lily's brews slightly unnerving in their consistent perfection. Harry's questions were, consistently, the best part of Remus's day. "Why do we say that the unforgivables can't be blocked?" Harry asked one afternoon, sitting at the study table with advanced defense, theory and practice open in front of him and the expression he wore when a textbook had said something he didn't entirely accept. "The books say they can't. But they all say it like it's a fixed fact rather than a tested limit." "What do you mean?" Remus asked, sitting down across from him. "The killing curse killed Voldemort when it bounced off me," Harry said, with the matter-of-fact directness of someone who has always known this about himself. "Which means it can be redirected. And if it can be redirected, then the rule isn't that it can't be blocked, the rule is that no one's yet found a reliable method." He tapped the book. "That's a different thing." Remus looked at him for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It is." "So what redirected it?" "Your mother's ward." Remus paused. "And possibly something about the nature of the curse itself. There's a theory, not widely accepted, because it requires admitting that Voldemort made a fundamental error in magical reasoning, that the killing curse depends on a certain absence of connection. That it travels to fill a space where love is not. And that it can't reach a space that's completely occupied by it. Harry considered this. That sounds poetic, he said. Not theoretical. Magic is both, Remus said. The mistake most people make is treating it as entirely one or entirely the other. Harry wrote something down. Then, what about the Imperius Curse? The books say it can't be resisted, but then there's a section 2 chapters later about people who did resist it at trial. Also a limit of conventional testing, Remus confirmed, with the specific pleasure of someone whose student has noticed the right inconsistency. So the ministry's official curriculum is teaching people to accept limits that might not be fixed. The ministry's official curriculum, Remus said carefully, teaches people to function within the ministry's official framework. Which is not the same thing as teaching people to think. Harry closed the book. I want to try resisting the Imperius Curse. You're 9. Almost 10. Still no. Remus held up a hand at Harry's expression. Not because you can't. Because the Imperius Curse requires a caster who is genuinely trying to control you, and I would need to genuinely try to control you, and I am not going to do that to you. Not at any age, frankly, but certainly not at 9. He paused. When you're older and Voss is satisfied with your mental defense exercises, we can discuss a controlled version. With serious present and kill conditions clearly established. Harry nodded, accepting this because it was a genuine reason rather than a dismissal. What about a clemency? Remus blinked. Where did you hear about a clemency? Griphook mentioned it. He said the goblins have an equivalent practice for protecting their mental architecture from intrusion. Harry's hand went briefly to his scar, a gesture so quick it was almost not there. I think I need to learn it. Remus was quiet for a moment. Why? He asked, very carefully. Harry looked at him steadily. Because sometimes I hear things, he said. When I'm nearly asleep. Voices that aren't mine, and feelings that aren't mine either. Anger that's larger than I am. And I want to know if it's coming in, or if it's already inside, because those are different problems. The room was very still. I'll talk to Sirius, Remus said. Tonight. I know what it probably is, Harry said, with a calm that was not absence of feeling but rather feeling so thoroughly processed that it had arrived somewhere steady. I've worked it out. Ragnarok said there was something in the scar that shouldn't be there. And Voldemort didn't die completely. It's not a huge leap. Remus looked at him, this 9-year-old boy, sitting at a study table in an underground room surrounded by maps and books and the weight of a war that had started before he could walk, and felt something that wasn't quite heartbreak but was in the same neighborhood. No, Remus said. It's not. I'm not scared, Harry said. I want you to know that. I'm not scared, I just want to understand what I'm dealing with. Understanding it is better than not understanding it. That's very true, Remus said. And very Lily. Harry almost smiled. Tell me about a clemency. It was Ragnarok who taught him, in the end. Goblin mental discipline was older than the wizarding version by several centuries, and it worked from a different fundamental premise. Wizarding a clemency, as Sirius understood it from the descriptions he'd read, was essentially about emptying the mind, making it a blank surface that an intruder found nothing to grip. The Goblin version worked in reverse. It was about architecture, building internal structures so complex and solid and deliberately inhabited that an intrusion had nowhere to go. Not a blank wall but a fortress, fully populated, with things in every room. Harry took to it with an ease that should have been reassuring and was instead, in the specific way of very capable children doing very dangerous things with grace, somewhat alarming. Within 3 months he had a stable internal structure that Ragnarok described as unprecedented in a human practitioner, with the qualification that goblin teachers had not instructed many human practitioners, so the comparison was limited. Within 6 months the voices from the scar had quieted, not stopped entirely, but been contained, put in a room with a heavy door that Harry controlled the key to. I can still feel it, Harry told Sirius one evening, sitting on the rug in the sitting room while Sirius read. The thing in the scar. But it's like, it knows I can feel it. And I think it knows I'm not afraid of it. Sirius lowered his book. Harry. I'm not trying to be dramatic, Harry said. I'm describing what I observe. I know you're not. Sirius set the book down entirely. I want to tell you everything now, if you're ready. Everything Ragnarok told me, and everything I suspect on top of that. Harry turned to face him fully. Yes. So Sirius told him. About Horcruxes, the theory, the specific evil of them, what they required to create and what it meant that Ragnarok believed Voldemort had made them. About the possibility that the scar itself was unintentional, created in the moment of the rebounding curse. About what that meant and what it didn't mean and the considerable distance between those two things. Harry listened. He was very still, the way he was when the information was important rather than just interesting, and when Sirius finished there was a silence that lasted about 30 seconds. So there's a piece of Voldemort's soul in my head, Harry said. Possibly, Sirius said. Ragnarok says possibly. He doesn't have certainty. But probably. Harry looked at his hands. And if it's there, it means that the ward Mum made, the one that makes me unkillable by him, is also protecting the piece of him that's inside me. We think so. Yes. Harry thought about this. So killing me would be his only way to remove it, and he can't kill me. A pause. That's either a very good position to be in or a very complicated one. Both, Sirius said. Simultaneously. The occlumency is helping. If it is there, the architecture I've built means it can't reach out and influence me as easily. Harry's voice was steady, practical, working through it. The question is whether we can remove it without removing me. That's the question Ragnarok is working on, Sirius said. And we have time. He's diminished. Whatever's in the scar is a fragment with no body, no power of its own beyond what it can borrow from proximity. And we're not giving it proximity. He held Harry's gaze. We are not going to let this define you. I need you to know that. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he said, I know. It's just a problem. Problems have solutions. He picked up his book again. We'll find it. Sirius looked at his godson, almost 10 years old, sitting in a goblin-carved room 3 levels underground, processing the information that he was carrying a fragment of the darkest soul of the last century with the same methodical equanimity he brought to everything, and thought, not for the first time, that he had no idea how he'd gotten so lucky. The letter from the ministry arrived 3 weeks before Harry's 10th birthday. Not his Hogwarts letter, that was still a year away. This was a formal ministry communication, on Department of Magical Law Enforcement stationery, addressed to the illegal occupant of Gringotts Bank, identified as Sirius Black, a mode of address that was both technically accurate and specifically designed to be offensive, demanding that he present himself for questioning regarding the events of October 31, 1981, and various subsequent charges including fugitive status, violation of the statute of secrecy, and child endangerment. Sirius read it over breakfast while Harry ate toast and Remus pretended to read the prophet. He set it down. Good timing, actually, he said. Harry looked up. Why good timing? Because we've spent the last year building the legal framework for my exoneration, and I was wondering when the ministry would give us a pretext to use it. Sirius folded the letter. They've just handed us one. What are you going to do? Remus asked, not pretending to read the prophet anymore. Respond, Sirius said. Through our legal team. Which is currently 4 of the finest contract minds in the Goblin Nation, 2 retired Wisengamot members who have significant reason to want the ministry embarrassed, and Cassian Voss, who I have been paying for 6 months to compile the evidentiary record of Peter Pettigrew's continued existence. The rat, Harry said. It was not a question. They discussed Peter enough times that Harry had a complete picture of it, stripped of nothing, because Sirius believed that people who were going to inherit a problem deserved to understand the full shape of it. He surfaced twice last year, Sirius said. Voss has sightings. Not proof yet, not the kind that survives Wizengamot scrutiny, but enough to demonstrate that the Ministry's case against me rests on a body that doesn't exist. He picked up his tea. We're going to file a counter-petition. Demand a formal review of the original conviction, which never happened, because there was no trial, which is itself a violation of 3 different sections of the Wizengamot Charter. Remus looked at him. You never had a trial? I was never tried, Sirius said, with the particular precision of someone who has spent 9 years being very clear about what was done to them. I was arrested, classified as a Death Eater, and sent to Azkaban. No hearing, no evidence presented, no defense. Bartemius Crouch signed the order personally. He set his tea down. Which is either going to be very useful or very dangerous when we bring it up, depending on Crouch's current political position. He's still in the department, Remus said. I know. Ragnarok's been watching him. Sirius looked at Harry. Do you want to come to the first legal meeting? It's your inheritance we're partly defending. Harry's expression was perfectly level. Yes. It'll be long. Lots of contract language. I've been studying Goblin contract law for 3 years, Harry said. I'll manage. The legal meeting was held in the deep negotiation room, and it was long, 4 hours, with 2 breaks, the second of which Ragnarok used to have food sent in because this was, he said, clearly going to require the evening, and Harry sat through all of it with a focus that made 2 of the retired Wizengamot members exchange a look that Sirius caught and logged for later. The strategy was layered. At its base, the absence of a trial, which was documented fact and legally explosive. Above that, the evidence of Peter Pettigrew's survival, circumstantial but building. Above that, a comprehensive challenge to the classification of Sirius as a Death Eater, which had been based on testimony from Bartemius Crouch himself and which could be attacked as self-serving given Crouch's own record, which was complicated in ways Ragnarok had been carefully documenting. And above all of that, the political reality that the Black family's financial weight, now properly activated and deployed, made Sirius a more expensive enemy than the Ministry had budgeted for. We're not trying to win quickly, Sirius told the room. We're trying to make the cost of not dealing with us correctly so high that the Ministry finds the path of least resistance runs through our position. That takes patience. And if they send orders? One of the Wizengamot members asked. They can't enter the bank, Ragnarok said, with the calm of a geographical fact. And when Lord Black and the child leave the bank? The room was quiet for a moment. We're working on that, Sirius said. The Fidelius charm, Harry said. Every head in the room turned toward him. He was sitting at Sirius's right, his hands folded on the table, looking entirely comfortable being looked at. The Fidelius wasn't reliable for my parents because Peter was a bad choice of secret keeper, Harry said. But the charm itself is sound. If the secret isn't our location but something more specific, something like the route between the bank and our destination, the coverage is narrower and therefore harder to break. He paused. And if the secret keeper is someone the Ministry can't get to easily, it holds. Voss, who was sitting against the far wall in the posture of someone technically present but not participating, made a small sound that might have been approval. Who would serve as secret keeper? Remus asked. Harry looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at Harry for a long moment. The Goblin High Council, he said slowly, has never served as a secret keeper for a wizard family. I know, Harry said. It would be a first. He held the old goblin's gaze with the steady directness that never quite looked like a child's gaze. But we have a political alliance, and this is what alliances are for. Making things possible that wouldn't be possible alone. There was a silence in the room. You negotiated that, Ragnarok said, and it was not entirely clear whether he was addressing Harry or observing a phenomenon. He looked at Sirius. Your godson negotiates like an elder. His father would have thought that was an insult, Sirius said. His mother would have considered it a compliment. I think it's just accurate. Ragnarok looked back at Harry. Something passed across his face, still not a smile, not quite, but something in its family. We will discuss it, he said. The council meets in 2 weeks. Harry nodded. Thank you. On the morning of Harry's 10th birthday, Sirius took him to the motorbike. He'd kept it in the Black family vehicle vault, which was a long low-ceilinged room that smelled of oil and iron and old leather, and which also contained several carriages that hadn't moved in a century and a very peculiar wheeled contraption that had belonged to an eccentric ancestor and which no one had ever successfully identified. The motorbike stood at the far end, cleaned and maintained by Griphook's people, still black, still enormous, still carrying the faint glamour that let it fly. Harry stood in front of it and put one hand on the handlebars without asking. It was your dad's first, Sirius said, but he gave it to me because he said it suited me better, which was probably true. Your dad was a broomstick person. Precise, responsive, something you could feel underneath you. I always preferred something with a little more weight to it. Harry sat on it. He was not quite big enough, but he would be. He settled his hands on the bars and looked straight ahead at the stone wall of the vault. Can it actually fly? He asked. Yes. Now? Not in here, Sirius said. But, he walked around to the side and pulled out his wand, and the ceiling of the vault, enchanted, it turned out, by some far-sighted ancestor, began to rise, pulling back like an enormous skylight, revealing a shaft of stone that went up and opened, finally, onto what appeared to be a narrow Diagon Alley rooftop at dawn, pale sky and the smell of city air. Harry looked up at it. His expression was the one he'd had in the map room at 5, looking at the deep geography of Britain, not wonder, exactly, which was a softer thing. Appetite. The Goblin High Council's answer came this morning, Sirius said, leaning against the vault wall. They agreed. The secret keeper arrangement starts next week. Harry looked at him. Which means we can go outside, Sirius said. Carefully. With precautions. But outside. Harry looked up at the shaft of morning sky above the vault. He was 10 years old, and he had spent most of his cognizant life underground, and the sky above him was a rectangle of blue going gold at the edges as the sun came up, and his hands tightened on the handlebars of his godfather's flying motorbike. Today? He asked. Today, Sirius said. They went up through the shaft on the motorbike, up into the London morning, and Harry Blackpotter felt the cold air hit his face for the first time in years and threw his head back and laughed, and it was his father's laugh, too loud, entirely unguarded, the laugh of someone who'd found something genuinely worth it, and Sirius, flying beside him on a broom he'd borrowed from the vault, heard it and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for 9 years. Below them, London moved. Above them, the sky was enormous and entirely open. 3 weeks after Harry's birthday, Dumbledore's owl came again. Sirius, you said 3 years. It has been 3 years. I will be on Diagon Alley on Thursday, at the tea shop on the east side, at 2 o'clock. I hope you'll come. Both of you, if Harry is willing. I know more now than I did. About the scar. About what it contains. We need to talk about it. Albus Sirius handed the letter to Harry. Harry read it. Then he set it on the table, smoothed it flat with one hand, and said, he knows about the Horcrux. Apparently. Does he know that we know? Probably not. Harry was quiet for a moment. We should go, he said. It's useful to meet him. I want to know what he thinks the solution is. He might want to use you, Sirius said, not softening it. I know. Harry met his eyes. He might also have information we need. Both things can be true. A pause. Besides, he should meet me. He's been working with an idea of me this whole time. The boy in the cupboard, or whatever I was supposed to be. He should see what actually happened. Sirius thought about the letter he'd sent 9 years ago on the back of Dumbledore's own parchment. I am building. He thought about the 10-year-old sitting across from him, who had just suggested meeting Albus Dumbledore not from obligation or fear but as a strategic decision made on his own terms. Thursday, Sirius said. 2 o'clock. Tell him we'll be there, Harry said, and went back to his book. Chapter 4, The Letter and the War. Beneath the tea shop was called Fortescue's Annex, and it sat on the east side of Diagon Alley wedged between a robe shop and an owl emporium, small and slightly overgrown with climbing plants that someone had charmed to flower in October. Sirius arrived 10 minutes early, which was a habit Voss had installed in him over the past year, and surveyed the street before going in. Dumbledore was already there. Of course he was already there. He was sitting at the corner table with a pot of tea and a half-eaten scone, wearing deep purple robes and reading what appeared to be a Muggle crossword puzzle with the focused attention of someone who found it genuinely challenging. He looked exactly as Sirius remembered him, older than seemed physically possible, with the half-moon glasses and the long white beard and the general impression of a man who had been ancient for so long that he'd arrived somewhere on the other side of it. He looked up when Sirius walked in, and his eyes, behind the glasses, were exactly as Sirius remembered those too. The specific shade of blue that sees more than it shows. Sirius, he said. You look well. You look exactly the same as you did 11 years ago, Sirius said, sitting down. Which is impressive given what those 11 years involved. The advantage of being very old is that the increments of aging become too small to notice, Dumbledore said pleasantly, and poured a second cup of tea with the ease of a man who'd known you'd take it without asking. Where is Harry? Outside, Sirius said. He wanted to look at the alley first. He's been underground most of his life. He's catching up. Dumbledore looked at the window, through which the alley was visible, busy, bright, the peculiar collision of commerce and magic that made Diagon Alley itself. After a moment he said, He's been watching this table since I arrived, hasn't he? Probably since you sat down, Sirius said. Smart boy. Smarter than either of us, Sirius said, with complete sincerity. Dumbledore smiled, and it was genuine, which was the thing about Dumbledore that Sirius had always found most disarming and most dangerous. His warmth was real. It existed alongside everything else, the manipulation and the long strategy and the willingness to sacrifice pieces for position, but the warmth was not performed. It made it very difficult to stay cleanly angry at him. The door opened and Harry came in. Sirius watched Dumbledore watch Harry cross the room, and he watched the old man's face do something that people's faces rarely did in Dumbledore's presence, which was react without calculation. A surprise, quickly processed. A reassessment. Harry was 10, almost 10 and a half, and he was James's height, which meant tall for his age, and he moved with the easy self-possession of someone who'd been trained physically and knew it. He was wearing dark clothes, practical, well-made, nothing that announced wealth but nothing that concealed it either, and he had his father's hair in its perpetual disarray and his mother's eyes, and the scar on his forehead was visible above the fringe and he hadn't hidden it and clearly had not considered hiding it. He sat down next to Sirius, poured himself tea from the pot without asking, and looked at Dumbledore. Professor Dumbledore, he said. Thank you for the tea shop. It was a good choice. Visible from 3 angles, 2 exits, central enough in the alley that any surveillance would be obvious. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. You've been well taught, he said. I've been well taught by several people, Harry said. Each of them is better at their specific area than a generalist curriculum would have produced. I think that matters. It does, Dumbledore agreed. May I ask, what subjects have you covered? Magical theory through 5th year level, approximately. Goblin contract law and ward architecture, which isn't in any Hogwarts curriculum but should be. Combat theory and decision-making. Potions. Languages, English, Latin, gobbledygook. History, including the parts that the standard histories skip. Harry looked at him levelly. And a clemency. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression, careful, quick. A clemency. Who taught you? Ragnarok. The Goblin High Director taught you a clemency. The Goblin method, Harry said. It's architecturally different from the wizarding version. More durable, I think, though I only have theoretical comparison. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Sirius drank his tea and watched the old man recalibrate, which was something worth watching. The adjustment was minimal externally but the eyes were working. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice shifted slightly, something gentler coming into it, which Sirius recognized as genuine. I owe you something that I've been working out how to say properly. I made a decision the night your parents died that affected your entire life, and I made it without adequate information and possibly without adequate humility. I intended to send you to your aunt and uncle's home because I believed the sacrificial ward your mother created could be extended to blood relatives, and I believed that ordinary life, a muggle childhood, would protect you from the weight of what the wizarding world wanted to make you. Harry listened. He didn't look away. His expression was not cold but it was absolutely still. I was wrong, Dumbledore said simply. About several components of that plan. And in any case, it didn't happen, because someone moved faster than I did and made a better choice. He glanced briefly at Sirius. What I want you to know is that the protection I was trying to create, the instinct behind it, was not about controlling you. It was about giving you a childhood. I had a childhood, Harry said. A good one. Yes, Dumbledore said. I can see that. You also know about the scar, Harry said, moving forward without ceremony. That's why you wanted this meeting. Dumbledore set down his cup. Yes. You know about Horcruxes. The word landed in the tea shop like a stone dropped in still water. Dumbledore was very still. Where did you hear that word? Ragnarok, Harry said. And then I did my own research. There's more information in the Goblin Historical Archives than in any wizarding library, because goblins keep records that wizards find politically inconvenient. He held Dumbledore's gaze. Voldemort made them. More than one. The scar might be one, made accidentally when the curse rebounded. I've been building a clemency architecture around the fragment for the past year, so it can't influence me, but it's still there. He paused. What's your plan for removing it? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, really looked, the full weight of however many years he was behind those eyes. I had a plan, he said slowly. It involved considerably more time and considerably less awareness on your part. I imagine it involved me dying, Harry said. Sirius went very still. Dumbledore did not look away. In the plan I had constructed, he said, yes. At a specific moment, under specific circumstances, the fragment would be destroyed along with, he stopped. I had convinced myself there would be a moment of return. I believe I was correct about the mechanics. I am less certain than I was that it was the only method. It's not, Harry said. The Goblin records describe 3 historical methods of removing a Horcrux from a living vessel without destroying the vessel. 2 of them are theoretical and one has one confirmed instance. He looked at Dumbledore calmly. I've been reading about it for 6 months. The tea shop was quiet. Outside, Diagon Alley moved, and people walked past the window carrying purchases and having arguments and living their ordinary magical lives with no idea what was being discussed over tea and scones at the corner table. Sirius realized his hands had gone very still on the table and he made himself pick up his cup. Dumbledore said, in a voice that had something different in it than before, something stripped of its layering, something closer to plain, show me. Harry reached into his jacket and produced a folded piece of parchment covered in his own handwriting, dense and organized, and slid it across the table. Dumbledore read it. He read it carefully, the crossword puzzle forgotten, and his expression moved through several things that Sirius couldn't quite name. When he looked up, he said, "You've been preparing for this for 6 months." "Longer," Harry said. But the specific research, yes. 6 months. This method, Dumbledore said, touching one passage on the parchment, requires a magical anchor, a person of significant power and deep connection to the vessel, to essentially pull the fragment free. It is extremely dangerous for the anchor. I know, Harry said. I'm not asking anyone to do it now. I'm 10. There's time. He paused. I just wanted you to know that I'm aware of all of it. And that if there's a version of this that doesn't require me to die, we're going to find it. The sentence was not dramatic. It was the tone of someone stating a project goal. You should be part of that. You know more about Voldemort than anyone alive. I do, Dumbledore said. Then work with us, Harry said. Not around us. Another silence. Outside, someone's owl knocked over a display of something in the shop across the way. Dumbledore looked at Harry, and then at Sirius, and Sirius met his gaze with an expression that said, without words, I told you. I was building. All right, Dumbledore said. I'll work with you. Good, Harry said, and ate his scone. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, borne by a school owl who deposited it on the breakfast table with the slightly injured dignity of a bird who had navigated significant ward resistance and felt this should be acknowledged. Harry picked it up, broke the seal, and read it. July 31st, he said. School starts September 1st. I know when school starts, Sirius said. I'm just noting the timeline. Harry set the letter down. We have 4 months. 4 months for what? For the negotiation. Sirius looked at him. What negotiation? The terms of my attendance, Harry said, and it sounded so reasonable, so entirely matter-of-fact, that Sirius had to take a moment to process the fact that his 10-year-old godson was proposing to negotiate his Hogwarts enrollment with the school that had been educating British wizards since 990 AD. Harry, Sirius said. You can't negotiate with Hogwarts. Why not? Hogwarts is an institution. It has rules. You apply, you attend, you follow the curriculum. Dumbledore is Hogwarts, Harry said. And Dumbledore has agreed to work with us. Which means there's a conversation to be had about how my education at Hogwarts interfaces with what I already know, what I need access to, and what the specific security situation around me requires. He looked at Sirius steadily. I'm not trying to get special treatment. I'm trying to make sure the arrangement is sensible for everyone, including the school. Because the alternative is that I turn up in September and spend a year in classes that cover material I already know, which is a waste of everyone's time. Sirius opened his mouth. Closed it. That's actually a fair point. I know it is. You've been thinking about this since the letter arrived, haven't you? Since before the letter arrived, Harry said. Since the meeting with Dumbledore. He folded the letter neatly. I'd also like Sirius, a fully exonerated Sirius, ideally, but if not, then one with legally documented guardianship status, to have access to the school in case of emergency. The trial, Sirius said. Right. The timing works, actually. Ragnarok says the formal review petition will reach the Wisengamot within 6 weeks. And Peter? Voss has 3 independent sightings now. He's with someone we think is connected to old Death Eater networks, one of the ones who avoided Azkaban by claiming Imperius. Sirius's voice was even, controlled. He's not idle. He's waiting for something. For Voldemort to come back stronger, Harry said. That would be my guess. Harry was quiet for a moment. We should tell Dumbledore about the sightings. Already done, Sirius said. He's confirmed that Voldemort is currently, he used the word blatant, diminished to something barely functional, keeping himself alive through a combination of magical parasitism and very dark arts that Dumbledore didn't specify. Sirius paused. He thinks a return is possible. Not certain. Not imminent. But possible. Within the decade. Probably. Harry picked up his letter again and looked at it. Then Hogwarts is actually the right move, he said. Not just for education. For positioning. Positioning, Sirius repeated. If something happens at Hogwarts, and statistically, given everything we know, something will, I should be there. Not because I can't handle myself otherwise, but because that's where it's going to happen. Harry looked up at him. The stone, for instance. Sirius went very still. What do you know about the stone? That Dumbledore moved it from Gringotts Vault 713 to Hogwarts sometime in the past year, because Gringotts Vault 713 had a routine audit discrepancy in March and the item logged as absent was described in the ledger only as PSN artifact, and flammable provenance. Harry's expression was perfectly mild. I have access to the audit ledgers. I've been reading them since I was 8. Sirius stared at his godson for a good 5 seconds. You read the audit ledgers. They're very interesting, Harry said. You can tell a lot about what people are afraid of by where they put their most valuable things. And you think, if Voldemort is looking for ways to restore himself, the Philosopher's Stone is the obvious method. And if he knows it's at Hogwarts, which, if he has any functioning intelligence network, he probably does, then Hogwarts is where the confrontation happens. Harry set the letter down. I want to be there. Prepared. I thought you said the return wasn't imminent. It's not. But first year starts in September and the stone is already there, so the timeline is what it is. Harry looked at him. I want to write to Dumbledore about it. Not to ask permission. To coordinate. Sirius rubbed his face with both hands. You're going to be a nightmare at Hogwarts, he said. For everyone. I'm going to be very well behaved at Hogwarts, Harry said, with perfect composure. I'll simply also be correct. The Wizengamot hearing took place on a Wednesday in mid-August, in the circular chamber beneath the Ministry of Magic, and it was not the quiet legal process that Ragnarok had initially outlined because nothing involving Sirius Black was ever quiet once it got started. The chamber held 50 Wizengamot members when fully assembled, plus the Minister of Magic, plus various departmental observers, plus, on this occasion, a row of goblin legal representatives that had never in anyone's memory appeared at a Wizengamot hearing and whose presence had caused significant administrative chaos in the 48 hours preceding the session. Ragnarok was not among them. The High Director did not attend ministry proceedings as a matter of principle that the ministry had stopped testing after 1752, but the 3 goblins who were present had the specific quality of people whose organization has been waiting 300 years to present a particular argument and is enormously ready to do so. Sirius sat at the respondents' table with his legal team arranged beside him and Harry in the gallery above, next to Remus, in the seat that Ragnarok had insisted on securing as part of the hearing agreement. Harry had argued that he should be at the table. Sirius had argued that he was 10. Harry had said that his age was irrelevant to his legal standing as the primary impacted party. Sirius had said that he was still 10. They had compromised on the gallery, which had direct sight lines to everything important and which Harry had spent the first 10 minutes surveying with the systematic interest of someone who appreciated good sight lines. Bartemius Crouch sat on the senior bench with the expression of a man who has been told something unpleasant is coming and has had time to compose himself but not quite enough time. The charges were read. 12 counts. Sirius let them finish. Then his lead goblin attorney, a lean, gray-faced individual named Sharpclaw who had been practicing before the Wizengamot for longer than most of the sitting members had been alive, stood up and said, in a voice like a blade being drawn, the respondent will note, for the record, that he was never tried on any of these charges. The chamber was quiet. Furthermore, Sharpclaw continued, the order authorizing the respondent's incarceration was signed by the head of magical law enforcement without a hearing, without a defense, and without the presentation of evidence to any judicial body, in direct violation of sections 42 through 47 of the Wizengamot Charter of 1722. He paused. Copies of the relevant sections have been provided to all sitting members. Copies of the original order have also been provided. The signature is Mr. Crouch's. Crouch's expression did not change. He was a controlled man. But something behind his eyes moved. The respondent's petition rests on 3 grounds, Sharpclaw said. First, the procedural invalidity of the original incarceration. Second, the misidentification of the respondent as a Death Eater, for which the prosecution's evidence was the sole testimony of Bartemius Crouch without corroborating documentation. Third, the continued existence of Peter Pettigrew, the actual perpetrator, whose faked death was the mechanism by which blame was attributed to the respondent. A murmur ran through the chamber. With respect to the third ground, Sharpclaw said, and produced a series of documents that he passed to the chamber's official recorder, we submit 7 independent witness accounts, 2 of which are sworn, attesting to sightings of Peter Pettigrew alive between 1982 and the present date. We further submit a ministry record showing that the remains identified as Pettigrew at the scene of the November 1, 1981 incident consisted of a single severed finger, which is not, under any internationally recognized standard of forensic magical evidence, sufficient to establish death. The murmur in the chamber became something louder. Sirius sat through all of it with his hands flat on the table and his face calm. He'd practiced the calm with Voss, who had been very specific about the importance of never letting a tribunal see you sweat, and the practice was paying off. He could feel the hearing moving, feel the weight of it shifting the way you feel a tide change, not the dramatic splash but the deep water turn. He looked up at the gallery. Harry was watching the chamber with the same clear-eyed attentiveness he brought to everything, and when he caught Sirius's eyes he gave a small nod that meant this is going the right way and looked back at the chamber. The deliberation took 2 hours. The outcome was not full exoneration, the Wisengamot moved carefully, and Crouch still had allies, and the ministry's institutional instinct was always to find a middle position that preserved maximum face. What they returned was a formal suspension of all charges pending independent investigation, the appointment of a special examiner, not a ministry employee, to review the original conviction, and, critically, the immediate restoration of Sirius Black's legal status as a free citizen pending the investigation's outcome. It wasn't everything. It was enough. On the way out of the chamber, Crouch fell into step beside Sirius for approximately 3 seconds, long enough to say, in a voice too low for anyone else to hear, "You should be careful, Black. The investigation you've started has more corners than you know." Sirius looked at him. "Good," he said. "I've always been better in corners." He walked on. Behind him, he heard Crouch stop walking, and he didn't look back. The real thing happened 4 days later. Voss found him in the corridor outside the training room at 7 in the morning, which was early even for Voss, with an expression that was not alarmed exactly but that had the controlled quality of someone processing alarming information. "Pettigrew moved," he said. Sirius went still. "Last night. He was at a property in Wiltshire, we'd been watching it for 2 weeks after the 3rd sighting. He left between midnight and 3 in the morning with at least 1 other person, possibly 2. The trail goes cold in Hampshire." "Hampshire," Sirius said. "There's an old Death Eater property in Hampshire. One of the ones that wasn't seized because it was in a secondary name." Voss paused. "The property belongs, technically, to a Muggle family named Riddle." The name hung in the corridor for a moment. "He's going to his master," Sirius said. "That's my read. How functional is Voldemort right now?" Dumbledore's assessment was barely. But Dumbledore's information is 8 weeks old. Voss looked at him directly. "If Pettigrew is providing a physical anchor, a body, a servant to work through, the timeline for any kind of return accelerates significantly." Sirius turned and walked back into the corridor, heading for Harry's room, where Harry was presumably still asleep because it was 7 in the morning and he was 10 years old and even Harry Blackpotter slept in occasionally. Harry was not asleep. He was sitting on his bed reading, with the stag on the pillow beside him and a map of Hampshire spread across the covers, and when Sirius came in with Voss behind him he looked up with an expression that said he already had a hypothesis. You've been watching the Hampshire property, Sirius said. Since Voss flagged it last week, Harry confirmed. The wards on it are interesting. Very old. Pre-ministry registration, which means they're not in any official record. He looked at Voss. He moved. Last night. Harry looked at the map. Something went very still in his expression, not fear, but the particular stillness of someone whose strategic picture has just shifted. We need to tell Dumbledore today. I'm going to, Sirius said. I want to come. Harry, I'm not asking to go to Hampshire, Harry said, with a precision that suggested he'd already considered and discarded that option. I'm asking to be at the meeting with Dumbledore. This involves me. The fragment in my scar, if Voldemort has a physical presence again, even a weak one, the connection will intensify. I'll be able to tell things. He paused. That's useful. But it also needs to be managed. Dumbledore should know the current state of my occlumency architecture before anything escalates. Sirius looked at him. He was 10 years old and he was talking about managing his connection to Lord Voldemort with the same methodical clarity he'd used at 8 when he talked about redesigning the vault wards. Get dressed, Sirius said. Harry was already moving. Dumbledore's response to their message was immediate and they met at Hogwarts for the first time, not in September with the rest of the students, but in August, through a side entrance that Dumbledore opened himself, leading them up through a castle that was empty and vast and smelled of stone and old wood and centuries of people who'd learned things here. Harry looked at everything. He didn't say anything on the way up, but Sirius could see him taking the castle in, cataloguing it, filing it, building his map. Dumbledore's office was everything Sirius remembered and more, the whirring instruments, the portraits of sleeping headmasters, the great desk, Fawkes on his perch making a low sound that was not quite music but moved in the same direction as music. Harry looked at Fawkes with open interest and Fawkes looked back with the bright, ancient attention of a creature that has seen many people come through this room and finds most of them broadly similar and occasionally doesn't. Then Fawkes got off his perch, crossed the room, and landed on Harry's shoulder. Harry went very still, one hand coming up slowly to rest near the bird. Fawkes made a sound against his ear and Harry's expression did something complicated, not pain, but the look of someone hearing something very clearly. What is he saying? Sirius asked. I don't know, Harry said. But it helps. The scar on his forehead had been faintly reactive all morning. Sirius had noticed the slight tension around his eyes, and whatever Fawkes was doing, it visibly eased. Harry stood there for a moment with his eyes closed and then opened them and said, the fragment is quieter. Dumbledore was watching this with the careful stillness of someone witnessing something outside his map. Phoenix Song, he said quietly. It has always had the property of, he stopped. I didn't know it would affect the scar. I didn't either, Harry said. Fawkes returned to his perch, but slowly, with what appeared to be reluctance. Harry looked at Dumbledore. Pettigrew went to Voldemort last night. You need to know the current state of the fragment because the connection will strengthen. And he sat down and began describing his internal occlumency architecture with the precision of an engineer presenting a structural report, and Dumbledore listened, and Sirius watched the old man's face, and what he saw there, underneath the careful assessment and the working mind, was something that looked like relief. Not that Harry was powerful, or prepared, or any of the strategic things he represented. Something more specific. The relief of someone who has been carrying a terrible plan alone for a long time and has just discovered, late, that there might be a better one. Sirius didn't forgive him for the plan. But he understood the relief. The stone, Harry said, when he'd finished the occlumency briefing. You moved it here. Voldemort will come for it. He will try, Dumbledore said. Quirinus Quirrell, Harry said. A beat. What about him? He's your defense against the dark arts teacher this year, Harry said. He went to Albania on sabbatical 2 years ago and came back changed. The tremor is new and the stutter is new and they appeared after Albania, not before. He paused. Albania is where you believe Voldemort has been existing as a wraith. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a very long time. You've been reading the staff records, he said. They're available through Gringotts payroll, Harry said. We hold the school accounts. Sirius pressed his lips together to keep his expression neutral. He's the Vector, Harry said. Quirrell. Voldemort is using him. He'll make a move for the stone during the school year, while I'm present and while the normal security of the school is providing cover. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I want to know what the stone's protections are so I can plan appropriately. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice had something in it now that was not manipulation and not strategy. Are you afraid? Harry considered this with what appeared to be genuine introspection. No, he said. I'm interested in how it goes. He paused. I was raised underground by goblins and a convicted fugitive. I have a piece of Voldemort's soul in my head and I've been building walls around it since I was 9. Quirinus Quirrell teaching me defense is, honestly, not the most alarming thing about my situation. Dumbledore's mouth curved. Not the performance of a smile, but the real one. Sirius had seen enough of both to know the difference. No, he said. I don't suppose it is. Tell me about the protections, Harry said. All of them. Dumbledore told him. Outside the office window, August Hogwarts spread out in the late afternoon sun, and the school felt different from how it had felt on the way up, more like a place that was ready for something, less like an empty building waiting for its students. Harry sat in the chair across from the headmaster of Hogwarts and took notes in the compact, precise handwriting that was entirely his own, and Fawkes watched from his perch with those bright ancient eyes. On the way back down through the castle, Harry stopped at the top of the main staircase and looked out through the high windows at the grounds, the lake, the forest, the Quidditch pitch catching the last of the sun. I'm going to like it here, he said. It was not a hope. It was a statement of fact, made by someone who had assessed the evidence and reached a conclusion. Sirius stood beside him and looked out at the school that was about to have Harry Blackpotter arrive in it, and felt, for the first time, something that might have been sympathy for Hogwarts. The Hogwarts letter negotiation happened the following week. It was, as Sirius had predicted, not a standard enrollment process. Harry had written a 12-point document outlining his existing competencies, his proposed areas of accelerated study, the security considerations pertaining to his specific magical situation, and a request for access to the restricted section with appropriate supervision. Dumbledore had read it, suggested 3 amendments, and accepted it essentially whole, with the private observation to Sirius that he had never in 115 years of involvement with Hogwarts received an enrollment proposal. No one ever thought to send one, Sirius said. No, Dumbledore said. No one ever did. The final thing, the thing that Sirius had been working toward all year with the legal team and Ragnarok and Voss's evidence file, came through on the last day of August, the day before Harry was to take the Hogwarts Express. Full exoneration. Not suspended charges. Not pending investigation. Peter Pettigrew's survival confirmed by 3 separate ministry investigators following Voss's evidence trail to a location in the south of England where Pettigrew had been confirmed alive, in hiding, and now actively sought. The case against Sirius Black formally closed. Bartemius Crouch formally censured for the procedural violation surrounding the original arrest. The letter came from the ministry on official stationery, and Sirius read it standing in the corridor outside Harry's room while Harry packed, and the feeling that went through him was not triumph exactly. It was something quieter than triumph. The specific satisfaction of a long patience ending correctly. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket and went into Harry's room. Harry was sitting on the bed next to his trunk, packed, organized with typical precision, with the stag in his hands. He looked up when Sirius came in, and read his expression the way Harry read everything, completely and immediately. It came through, Harry said. Full exoneration, Sirius confirmed. Signed by the minister. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he got up and crossed the room and hugged him, which he didn't do constantly but did completely when he did it, no performance, just the full and uncomplicated physical expression of a feeling too large for words. Sirius held on. In the carved stone room underground, with the maps on the walls and the green lights and 10 years of building everything they had from nothing but a decision made in a ruined nursery, he held on. "Platform 9 3/4 tomorrow," Harry said, against his shoulder. "Platform 9 3/4 tomorrow," Sirius agreed. "You're coming to the platform?" "Obviously. As a free man." "As a free man," Sirius said. "Yes." Harry pulled back and looked at him with Lily's eyes and James's hair and his own particular and entirely unrepeatable quality of being exactly what he was without apology. "Good," he said, and went back to packing. Chapter 5, Hogwarts. Unimpressed, the Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock precisely, and Harry Blackpotter was on it with a trunk that contained 6 years of personal notes, a complete set of textbooks through 7th year, a goblin-made wand holster that released on a specific pressure pattern rather than a wrist movement, and the stuffed stag, which he had packed in the side compartment without explaining himself to anyone. Sirius had walked him to the barrier at platform 9 3/4, which had a different quality than Harry had imagined, not dramatic, just an ordinary-looking brick wall that you walked through with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the trick, and then suddenly the train was there, red and enormous, breathing steam into the September morning. Sirius had been recognized twice on the platform, by parents who'd seen the exoneration in the Prophet and who stopped and stared with expressions ranging from surprise to uncomfortable. He'd ignored them completely, which was a skill he'd apparently possessed naturally before Azkaban and had refined in the decades since. "Right," Sirius said, at the train door. "I'll write. Not just reports. Actually write. I understand the difference between correspondence and intelligence briefings," Harry said. "I know you do. Write anyway." Sirius looked at him, one of those moments that was trying to compact a great deal into a short duration. "You're going to be extraordinary up there." "I'm going to be adequate," Harry said, which was not modesty but strategy. "Until it's useful to be something else." Sirius laughed, the too loud one. Several people on the platform looked over. He didn't care. "Your father would have loved you so much," he said. Harry smiled, the real one. "I know," he said. "Go home. I'll see you at Christmas." He got on the train. He found a compartment 2 cars back that was empty except for a girl with bushy brown hair and a large book, who looked up when he slid the door open with the particular expression of someone who has been hoping for either no one or someone interesting and is waiting to see which category this represents. "Is this compartment taken?" Harry asked. "No," she said. Though a boy looked in earlier and seemed put off by the books. "So fair warning." "The books are the recommendation," Harry said, and put his trunk up and sat down. She looked at him for a moment with the assessing quality of someone who reads people the way she reads text, quickly, with attention to detail. Then her gaze went to his forehead, and he watched the recognition happen. "You're Harry Potter," she said. "Harry Blackpotter," he said. "The hyphen matters to me legally, but I don't correct everyone." She blinked. "The papers said, I read about your godfather's exoneration in the Prophet. And then I went back and read all the previous coverage, because the older coverage kept contradicting itself in ways that suggested the original story was." She stopped herself. "Sorry. I do that." "Do what?" "Follow information to its logical conclusion without checking if the other person wants to follow it there too." "I want to follow it there," Harry said. "The original story was what?" "Wrong," she said simply. "The charges against your godfather were never supported by the quality of evidence that warranted his imprisonment. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. First generation, both my parents are Muggle dentists." "I know what dentists are," Harry said. Something in her expression eased. "A surprising number of people don't." "My education covered Muggle subjects as well as magical ones," Harry said. I think the gap between the two communities is partly a literacy problem. Each side lacks the vocabulary to discuss what the other does. Hermione stared at him. I have been trying to articulate that exact point to various people for 2 months and couldn't find the right framing. She paused. How long have you been thinking about it? Since I was about 7, Harry said. We had a lot of time underground. She opened her mouth, closed it, decided to engage with the most interesting part. Underground? So he told her, not everything, but the shape of it, and she listened with the focused, intelligent attention that he recognized as the same quality he valued in himself and rarely found in people his own age. By the time the train had cleared London's suburbs and was running through open countryside, she had asked 14 questions, 9 of which were genuinely good ones, and he had answered all of them except the 3 that touched on things he hadn't decided to share with someone he'd met 40 minutes ago. She noticed which ones he didn't answer and didn't push, which was the right call and told him something. You've already read all the textbooks, she said. It wasn't a question. And through 7th year, he said. Most of them, anyway. The potions texts are better in the original French editions. I only read through 3rd year, she said, with the specific competitiveness of someone who is comfortable being excellent and calibrates against other excellent people rather than average ones. I didn't know the French editions existed. I'll lend you mine, Harry said. They're annotated, but the annotations might be useful. Whose annotations? Mine and Remus Lupin's. He taught me theory for 3 years. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Remus Lupin I've read some of his papers on defensive enchantment theory. He only published 2, but they were very good. Where is he now? He teaches me, Harry said. Or he did. He'll probably look for work outside the vaults, now that I'm at school. He should apply at Hogwarts, Hermione said immediately. The defense position has been vacant, well, occupied, but the current teacher is apparently quite. She stopped. Did I just tell Harry Potter who the current defense professor is? You presumably know. Quirinus Quirrell, Harry said. Yes. Something in his tone, not much, but enough, made Hermione look at him carefully. You said that like it means something. It means several things, Harry said. None of which I'm going to say on the Hogwarts Express. He met her eyes. But if you want to know more than the curriculum tells you about defense, find me in the library. She looked at him for a long moment. Are you always like this? Like what? Like you're already 3 steps into a plan. Usually more than 3, Harry said, and the compartment door opened and a round-faced boy peered in, holding a toad and looking like he'd been having a terrible morning. The sorting was the first surprise Hogwarts offered, and Harry managed it better than he expected. The Great Hall was exactly what it was supposed to be, high, candlelit, magical in the specific way of things that have been beautiful for so long they've become authoritative. The enchanted ceiling showed a cloudy night sky and the 4 long tables were full of students who all turned to look at the first years filing in with the frank curiosity of people evaluating new arrivals. Harry filed in with the rest, in alphabetical disorder, and kept his expression calibrated to the level of impressed but not overwhelmed that was accurate without being either dismissive or wide-eyed. He could feel the attention on him, not just the students, but the teachers, and specifically, from the staff table, 2 sets of eyes that had a different quality from the general looking. One was Quirrell. He was sitting 3 places from the center, slight and turbaned, and when his eyes found Harry his hands went very still around his goblet, and the thing that Harry felt from the scar was brief and sharp and then contained, because the occlumency architecture held. It was there, though. A recognition, like 2 magnets briefly near each other. The other set of eyes was Snape's, which Harry had been briefed on. Sirius had given him an extremely comprehensive portrait of Severus Snape, fair in a technical sense and clearly costing him something personally. Sirius had said, he was brilliant, he was cruel in specific directions, he loved Harry's mother and never forgave himself for choices made at 17, and he will make your potions life either extraordinary or miserable depending on factors you can't fully predict. Harry had noted all of this and reserved judgment. The sorting hat was placed on his head and immediately said, in a thoughtful interior voice, "Oh. Well, this is different." "Hello," Harry thought back. "You can hear me clearly. You've been in here for approximately 2 seconds." "Yes, I can hear you." The hat did what felt like a laugh. "All right, Black Potter. Let me look." A pause, longer than it needed to be. "There is a great deal here. More than most students by a considerable margin." Another pause. "Gryffindor, obviously, you have your father's courage and your mother's conviction in precisely equal measure, and the combination is specifically Gryffindor. But Ravenclaw would not be wrong. Nor would Slytherin, frankly, the strategic thinking, the patience, the willingness to play a long game. You're more house ambiguous than anyone I've sorted in 50 years. Where do you think I belong?" Harry thought. "I think you'd be dangerous in any of them," the hat said, with what felt like genuine admiration. "But I think Gryffindor is where you'd be happiest. And I have a theory that happy students do better work. I thought that was my choice." "It is," the hat said. "I'm advising." Harry thought about it for a genuine moment, about Hermione, who had the quality of someone going to Gryffindor or Ravenclaw, about the kind of people each house made and what those people grew into. About who he wanted beside him. "Gryffindor," he said. "Gryffindor," the hat announced, and the table on the left erupted. He sat down at the Gryffindor table between a red-headed boy who introduced himself immediately as Ron Weasley and an older boy who said, "Brilliant, another first year," with warm sincerity, and Hermione was sorted to Gryffindor 12 minutes later and sat across from him with the specific expression of someone who has gone somewhere they wanted to go and is trying not to show it. Potions, first thing on Friday morning, was not what most students experienced. Snape's entrance was cinematic, which Harry had expected from Sirius's description, and his opening speech had the rhythm of something repeated annually but still believed. He stopped at the name Black Potter on the register. "You," he said, and the word carried years of something Harry wasn't entirely the cause of. "You have your mother's eyes." "So I've been told," Harry said. "Not cold. Not warm. Accurate." Something moved through Snape's expression, quick, complicated. He moved on. The first practical class was basic, a simple boil-cure potion, first-year introductory level. Harry followed the instructions exactly, not because he needed to, but because this was not the moment to demonstrate deviation, and because he had learned from 3 years of Remus teaching him that there was information in the standard method even when you knew the advanced one. His potion was correct. Not spectacular. Correct. Snape stopped at his cauldron at the end of the class and looked at it for a long moment without speaking. "You added the porcupine quills after removing from heat," Snape said. "The instructions say after step 6, which most students interpret as before removal. The heat accelerates the quill dissolution but disrupts the sulfur balance," Harry said. "The instructions are ambiguous. The intended result is cleaner if you interpret them conservatively." Snape looked at him. "Where did you learn that?" "I worked it out," Harry said. The chemistry was relatively straightforward. Another long look. "Write me a 12-inch essay on the sulfur interactions in base boil-cure potions," Snape said. "By Monday." Not a punishment. Harry recognized what it was. "Yes, Professor." Snape moved on. Across the table, Hermione was watching this exchange with alert interest. Harry caught her eye and didn't say anything, but she nodded slightly, which meant she'd noticed what he'd noticed, that Snape had not been looking for a weakness, but for an edge. The essay he wrote was 20 inches and covered 3 related reactions that the question hadn't asked about. He submitted it Monday and said nothing. Snape returned it on Wednesday with no mark and a single note at the bottom in tight, cramped handwriting: "The third reaction is incorrectly sequenced. See me Thursday." He saw Snape Thursday and they argued, properly argued, with citations and counterexamples, for 40 minutes in the potions classroom while Snape's expression went from suspicious to engaged, and at the end of it Snape said, in the tone of someone making a significant concession, "Your sequence is conditionally correct under specific temperature conditions not specified in your essay." "I should have specified," Harry said. "Yes," Snape agreed. "Don't make me tell you twice." It was, Harry understood, the beginning of something that would look like antagonism from the outside and was actually something closer to the only kind of respect Severus Snape knew how to express. He found Quirrell's defense class interesting in the way you find a fire interesting when you're holding a bucket of water: practical attention, no panic. Quirrell taught the standard curriculum with a nervous energy that could be read as anxiety and was something else, something that Harry caught in the odd moments of absolute stillness beneath the stutter. The turban was there every day, and when Harry was within 12 feet of it the scar pulsed, not painfully, just present, like a compass finding north. He said nothing about this in class. He took notes. He answered questions correctly and not more correctly than that, though in the second week Quirrell asked about counterjinxes and Harry had to deliberately restrain his answer to the level the class was at, which felt artificial but was strategically sound. After the third class, Quirrell kept him back. "Mr. Blackpotter," he said, with the stutter that Harry now understood was partly real, the strain of carrying what he was carrying, and partly performance. "You seem very comfortable with the defensive material." "I had a good education before Hogwarts," Harry said. "Indeed." Quirrell's eyes were steady on him, and underneath the nervous effect there was something else looking out, something with a quality that the scar recognized. "You must find my class rather below your level." "Every class has something to offer," Harry said pleasantly. Quirrell looked at him for a moment. The thing looking out from behind his eyes was measuring. Harry met its gaze without flinching because flinching would tell it something he didn't want it to know. "You may go, Mr. Blackpotter," Quirrell said. Harry went. In the corridor, once around the corner, he pressed one hand against the stone wall and let his acclimacy architecture settle back fully into place. The fragment in the scar had been reaching during that conversation, gently, exploratorily, the way water finds cracks. He'd felt it. He wrote a letter to Sirius that evening that was, on its surface, a description of the first week of classes and, to a careful reader, a complete tactical assessment. Sirius wrote back in 12 hours. The reply read, "Voss is watching Quirrell's background. Dumbledore has been notified of the contact. Do not confront. Do not avoid. Observe." And then, on a new line, "Also you're in a house with Fred and George Weasley. I feel you should know I knew their father and this information should be treated as a warning." Harry looked at the twins in question across the Gryffindor common room, where they were currently doing something to a first-year's quill that looked like it would end badly for the quill. He had already, independently, identified them as potentially useful. By the third week of October, Harry had a complete picture of the castle. Not metaphorically, he had an actual map, drawn in his own hand across 2 large sheets of enchanted parchment, updated with observation notes and timing patterns and 3 things he'd found that weren't on any official plan of the building, including a passage behind the 4th-floor mirror that smelled of dog and connected to a point he hadn't yet identified, and a room on the 7th floor that seemed to respond to what you needed when you walked past it, which was fascinating and warranted further investigation. He also had the social landscape more or less charted, which was its own kind of cartography. Hermione was his closest friend, which had happened organically and quickly and felt, to Harry, like meeting someone who spoke the same primary language after years of competent translation. She was brighter than anyone gave her credit for because most people assessed intelligence by confidence rather than quality of thought, and Hermione's confidence was specifically in being correct, which read as aggressive to people who preferred confidence in performance. Ron Weasley was a different and equally useful quantity, easy-natured, strategically underestimated by everyone including himself, with a quality of instinctive loyalty that Harry had identified by the second day as something rare and worth cultivating properly. He had a gift for seeing the essential structure of a problem stripped of its complicating details, which looked like simplicity from the outside and was actually a form of intelligence that Remus had once described as cutting to the bone. Neville Longbottom was improving week by week under the specific influence of not being told he was bad at things, which was apparently all he'd needed. He was good at herbology with a precision that approached artistry, and he was going to be excellent at it once someone gave him consistent encouragement, which Harry did because it cost nothing in Neville's face when something he grew did what it was supposed to was one of the best things in the castle. Draco Malfoy had approached him on the second day in potions with the manner of someone extending significant social capital and expecting recognition. Harry had been polite, measured, and given him absolutely nothing to work with because Malfoy's framework for the world was one Harry had grown up around, old family money and the social obligations it was supposed to carry, and he'd watched it rot his own family from the inside and had no interest in importing it into his friendships. Malfoy had taken this as a personal slight, which it wasn't. It was just information about priorities. "He's going to make your life difficult," Hermione said, with the tone of someone reporting a weather forecast. "Probably," Harry agreed. "I'm not particularly worried about it. He has social capital here. His family has social capital with families like his family," Harry said. "Which is a smaller group than he thinks." He paused. "Also his father owes the Black Vaults a fairly significant sum from a 1987 contract renegotiation that he's been hoping everyone forgot about. He won't make anything too complicated." Hermione stared at him. "You went through the contract records." "I grew up in them," Harry said. "Old family debts are one of the more stable forms of influence." "That's slightly terrifying," Hermione said. "It's just accounting," Harry said. The troll happened in late October, as things do when the castle is settling into its year and the various forces that have been building pressure find their first release valve. Harry was in the library when Hermione wasn't at the Halloween feast, and he knew she wasn't at the feast because he knew her habits well enough to know that the argument she'd had with Ron at breakfast, which had been Ron's fault, though not entirely, as was usually the case, would have sent her somewhere with books and no people. The library was the most likely destination. But Hermione wasn't in the library when he arrived. He found her in the bathroom corridor because of the smell, which hit him from 20 feet away, the specific, overwhelming quality of something very large and very wrong, and he arrived around the corner to find a 12-foot mountain troll with a club the size of a tree and Hermione backed against the sinks making a sound that was the compressed form of screaming under complete terror. Ron was already there, white-faced, wand out, clearly in the process of deciding what to do. Harry pulled his wand, assessed the geometry in approximately 1 second, troll between them and Hermione, low ceiling reducing its swing arc, stone floor giving it poor traction, and said, "Ron. The leg. Hard as you can. Now." Ron fired the leg locker curse. It hit the troll's right leg and the troll stumbled. Harry moved, not away from it but sideways and forward, using its stumble to get inside its range, and cast a targeted reductor at the base of the troll's club arm while it was off balance, and the combination, leg locker, reductor at the joint, the weight of the club pulling forward, brought it down hard onto the stone floor where it hit its own head on the sink basin and went still. It took 11 seconds. Ron stared at the troll. Then at Harry. "How did you, geometry," Harry said. "Hermione, are you all right?" Hermione was staring at the troll with an expression that was cycling through several phases. "That's not, the leg locker curse isn't supposed to, and the reductor targeted at a joint specifically," she looked at Harry. "Where did you learn combat application at this scale?" "Cashin Voss," Harry said. "Exor." He was very specific about geometry. The teachers arrived then, McGonagall first, sharp-faced and startled in a way she was covering rapidly, Quirrell immediately behind her, and Dumbledore's deputy actually flinched when she saw the troll because it was down and the first years were standing and the arithmetic of that was not sitting right. She asked what happened. Ron began to explain. Hermione, to Harry's considerable respect, said that she tried to handle the troll herself and that the boys had come to help, which was not entirely accurate but was calibrated to protect them from consequences they didn't deserve. McGonagall looked at the troll. Looked at Harry. 11 years old, she said, very quietly, as though making a note to herself. I had very good preparation, Harry said. She gave them 5 points each for the effort and ushered them out, and as they left Harry glanced back and caught Quirrell's eyes across the corridor. The thing looking out of them was not pleased. It was recalibrating. Good, Harry thought. Let it recalibrate. November into December had a particular quality, the castle getting colder, the work getting harder, the social topography of Gryffindor House settling into its comfortable configurations. Harry found the rhythm of it easier than he'd expected, not because it was unchallenging but because the underlying current of it was something he recognized, a community of people who were learning things together, and the specific companionship that produces. He wrote to Sirius twice a week. He wrote to Remus about academic things, and to Voss about tactical observations, and to Ragnarok about specific things that required Ragnarok's specific kind of response. He flew. Gryffindor had its first flying lesson on a grey Thursday and Harry got on a broomstick for the second time in his life and understood immediately why James Potter had been Gryffindor's star seeker, because the motorbike was magnificent but this was something different, this was purely responsive, and the feeling of pulling into a fast turn 20 feet off the ground with the castle below and the sky above was extraordinary. McGonagall, watching from the ground, gave him the same look she'd given him in the bathroom corridor. He was on the Quidditch team by Thursday evening. Hermione pointed out, with some amusement, that he'd demonstrated his flying ability on the first lesson in front of the entire year group, which was not consistent with his general policy of adequate until useful. Broomstick isn't tactical, Harry said. It's just fun. There's a distinction. Some things you do well because they're useful, Harry said. Some things you do well because they're worth doing well. He paused. My dad was the best seeker Sirius ever saw. I don't want to fly badly because of strategy. Hermione looked at him with the softened expression she had when he said something that showed the seams of something larger. That's very different from how you talk about everything else. Yes, Harry said, simply, and they went back to their charms homework. He found the Mirror of Erised in December. He'd been exploring the 7th floor, following up on the room that responded to need observation, and taken a wrong turn in the castle's particular way of misdirecting people who weren't paying attention, and ended up in a dust-sheeted and used classroom where the mirror stood against the far wall, tall and gold-framed, showing not the room but something else. He stood in front of it. His reflection looked back at him, but the reflection was surrounded, people on both sides. On his left, a tall man with dark, slightly untidy hair and round glasses and a laugh-line quality even in stillness, one hand on Harry's shoulder. On his right, a woman with red hair and green eyes that were exactly his own, and her expression was the one he'd imagined 10,000 times from Sirius's descriptions, the particular intensity of someone who loves you specifically rather than generally. He stood there for longer than he intended. He was not cold about it. He was not detached or strategic about it. He stood in the cold classroom in December and looked at his parents standing next to him in a mirror that showed what you wanted most, and he felt it, the full weight of what he'd never had, and he didn't try to not feel it because that would be dishonest about the only thing that had ever actually cost him something. After a while he said, to the mirror, quietly, I know you're not real. The reflection of Lily Potter smiled. Not sadly. Like she was proud of him. He looked at the inscription along the mirror's top, Erist stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi, and worked out the reversal in about 20 seconds, and thought, I show not your face but your heart's desire. He thought about the family treasury at home, the brass-framed mirror that showed what you needed rather than what you wanted, the one Harry had looked into at 8 and seen his reflection smile before he was smiling. Different mirrors. Related principle. He came back the next night. And the night after that. And on the 4th night he didn't go, because he'd noticed the pull of it, the specific quality of wanting to go back, and he recognized that quality and decided to respect it rather than indulge it further. He told Hermione, because there was no point in having someone this honest in your life if you didn't use them for the things that required honesty. It shows your family, she said, quietly. My parents. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. That must have been, she stopped. I don't know what that must have been. It was honest, Harry said. I think that's the most accurate description. It showed me something true. But Dumbledore told me once that the mirror gives neither knowledge nor truth, that men have wasted away before it. And I believe that's also true. What does it show you when you look in it now? She asked. I don't go anymore, Harry said. She looked at him with the expression she had when she was working out something about him rather than something academic, which was a different kind of concentration. You're more layered than I expected, she said. You mean I'm not what people expect from the boy who lived? No one calls you that to your face, she said. They think it. What do you think about it? Harry considered this. I think I'm Harry, he said. I think whatever happened when I was 1 year old is part of my history, but it's not my personality. Sirius spent 10 years making sure of that. He paused. I think the people who want me to be a symbol are welcome to have their symbol, and I'll just be here being myself, and those are separate projects that don't need to conflict. That's very healthy, Hermione said. It's Sirius's doing, Harry said. Mostly. The Quidditch match was in late November, Gryffindor versus Slytherin, and Harry played it the way he played everything, with full commitment once committed, no holding back once engaged. He found the snitch at 14 minutes, which was fast, and caught it in a dive that took him within 10 feet of the ground at speed and which caused the Gryffindor stands to make a noise that he felt in his chest as much as heard. In the stands, Quirrell was watching. The scar pulsed. Harry landed, caught the confirming flash from his occlumency architecture that the fragment was contained, and looked up at the staff box where Quirrell sat very still with an expression that was two things at once, and behind Quirrell, Snape, who was watching Harry with an expression that had nothing theatrical in it for once, just something complex and direct. Flint of Slytherin got in his face immediately after the match about the dive being reckless, and Harry looked at him with the specific patience of someone who has been trained by an ex-Auror and tutored by goblins and is not particularly troubled by a 15-year-old trying to seem intimidating. I caught the snitch, Harry said. Was there something else? Flint went red. Wood stepped between them. The moment dispersed. Later, in the changing rooms, Wood was saying something about the dive being extraordinary and Harry was unlacing his boots and thinking about the scar's reaction during the match, mapping the pattern of its responses over the semester. It was more active than it had been before term began. Not threatening, but growing. Whatever Quirrell was doing to position himself, it was accelerating. He wrote to Sirius that night with the full tactical update. Sirius replied, Voss has confirmed movement in the Hampshire location. Something was activated but not completed. Dumbledore is aware. Timeline is unchanged but active. Be ready. Harry folded the letter and thought about what be ready meant when you'd been preparing for something your entire cognitive life. He thought it probably meant, don't be surprised when it arrives. He wasn't going to be. The Christmas holidays came and half the school emptied, and Harry stayed, not because he had nowhere to go, but because he wanted to be in the castle when it was quiet, and because Hermione was going home and Ron was going home and it was a good time to move through the library without competition for the reference shelves, and because the restricted section was accessible in ways that normal term didn't allow. He also stayed because Sirius was coming. Not inside Hogwarts. Dumbledore had extended an invitation and Sirius had declined with the specific courtesy of someone who wanted to make it clear the declination was not hostility, but to Hogsmeade, which was close enough. They spent Christmas Day at the Three Broomsticks, just the two of them, at a table in the back corner, and Remus came by train and arrived at noon with snow in his hair and better color than he'd had in years, because living above ground and having a purpose suited him in ways that living underground had not. They ate an enormous lunch and Sirius told him everything new from the legal developments. Crouch was under formal review, the Peter Pettigrew manhunt had international involvement now, 2 former Death Eaters had been taken in for questioning regarding the Hampshire property. Harry listened and updated the picture in his head and then put it aside because this was Christmas and Sirius had brought him a broomstick maintenance kit and a book that was funny in 3 languages simultaneously, and Remus had made him a chocolate thing that required no formal description beyond extraordinary. "How are you finding it?" Remus asked, meaning Hogwarts, meaning the whole shape of it. "Better than I expected," Harry said honestly. "Some of it is slower than I'd like. Most of the people are more interesting than I expected." He paused. "Snape is fascinating. Not in a comfortable way." "Never comfortable," Sirius said. "He knows things about potions that aren't in any text," Harry said. "He's discovered things himself. He annotates his copies of the books, I've seen him with them in class. I want to see his personal research." "Ask him," Remus said. "Directly." "I'm building up to it," Harry said. "He's not ready to let me in yet." Sirius looked at him. "Are you actually trying to befriend Severus Snape?" "I'm trying to learn everything available at Hogwarts," Harry said. "He's part of what's available." Remus laughed. "Proper, warm." "That's Lily's logic," he said. "Exactly." Harry smiled. Outside, Hogsmeade was snowed in and quiet, and the pub was warm, and Sirius was explaining something about the motorbike's new modifications with the enthusiasm of someone who has found the exact right topic, and Remus was listening with the patient affection of someone who has heard a great deal about this motorbike, and Harry sat between them in the warm and felt the specific gravity of being completely in the right place. He went back to the castle in the evening, through the quiet snow, and found Neville in the common room working on a herbology essay with the expression of someone who has been wrestling with a sentence for 20 minutes. Harry sat down across from him and said, "What's the structure problem?" Neville looked up. "The root properties. I know them but I can't, the sentence keeps coming out wrong." "Technical knowledge and written expression are different skills," Harry said. "Tell me what you know, just talking. Don't write it." Neville told him. He knew it very well, actually. Harry helped him translate from knowing to writing, and the essay got done in 40 minutes, and Neville's expression at the end was the one Harry had identified in October as one of the best things in the castle. "You're really good at explaining things," Neville said. "Remus taught me how to teach," Harry said. "He said the best way to know if you understand something is whether you can help someone else understand it." Neville was quiet for a moment. "Your life sounds very different from mine," he said, with the honesty of someone who'd been comparing notes internally. "I know," Harry said. "I think different can be good. If it makes you capable, it's good." He paused. "You're more capable than you think. Anyone who grows things the way you do understands something deep about how living systems work, and that's not a small thing." Neville looked at him. "Sirius Black raised you," he said. "Yes. He must be brilliant at it." Harry thought about a man who had stood in a ruined nursery with nothing but a ring and a memory and a choice, and had built something from it. "He is," Harry said. "Genuinely." Chapter 6, The Reckoning at the Mirror. The thing about inevitability is that it doesn't announce itself. It just arrives. Harry felt it on a Thursday in June, which was otherwise ordinary, breakfast, charms, a free period he'd been planning to use in the library, as a change in the quality of the scar's background signal. Not pain. A pressure, like weather before a storm, the barometric shift you feel in your bones before the sky does anything visible. He set down his fork at breakfast and was very still for a moment, running through his occlumency architecture, checking the room he'd built around the fragment. The door to the room was vibrating. Not because the fragment was pushing out. Because something external was pulling at it. He caught Hermione's eye across the table. She read his expression the way she'd learned to read it over a year of paying close attention, and put down her own fork. "Today?" she said, very quietly. "I think so," Harry said. "Or tonight. You're going to go down there?" "Yes." Ron looked between them. "Go down where? What's tonight?" Harry had told them both, Hermione completely, Ron in the structure without all the specific detail, because he'd decided months ago that people who were going to be in the building when something happened deserved to know what they were in the building with. He'd also told them because they were his friends, and friends were the kind of allies you built from honesty rather than convenience. The stone, Ron said, not quietly enough, and then quieter, tonight. I don't know if it's tonight exactly, Harry said. But the timing has shifted. Something's changed in what Quirrell is doing. He looked at his breakfast, found he wasn't hungry, pushed the plate aside. I need to get a message out before anything happens. Sirius needs to know. You send it now and Quirrell might notice the owl, Hermione said, already thinking through it. The ward's on the Ollery. I have a different method, Harry said. He did. He had, since October, maintained a communication channel with Gringotts through a small piece of enchanted parchment that Ragnarok had provided with the specific instruction that it was for emergencies, to be used when Owl Post was unreliable or monitored. He'd never used it. He was going to use it now. He wrote 2 lines in the margin of his charms notes, which appeared on the corresponding parchment in the Goblin communication room 3 levels underground at Gringotts, and then pressed his thumb to the Black family seal in the corner. Done. Sirius would have the message within the hour. Quirrell disappeared from the staff table at dinner. It was the kind of absence that only registered if you were looking for it, which Harry was. The chair was there. The turban was not. Most of the hall was occupied with end-of-year energy, the specific euphoria of people who have finished exams and are trying to remember what it felt like to have free time, and the missing professor registered with approximately no one except Harry, who noted it, and Dumbledore, who was not at the table either. Harry looked at the high table, where McGonagall was eating with the composed efficiency of someone covering the fact that she was aware of several things she couldn't discuss at dinner. He looked at his friends. Now, he said. Hermione stood immediately. Ron was a half-second behind, knocking his goblet, catching it. They left the hall and Harry took them the fast way, 3rd floor, the locked door they'd found in September, which Harry had mapped and which he had a method of opening that didn't require breaking any rule that had been specifically articulated in writing. The door wasn't locked. The 3 of them stopped in the corridor outside it, looking at the door standing slightly ajar. He's already gone through, Ron said. Yes, Harry said. Which means the timeline is now rather than tonight. He pushed the door open. The dog, Fluffy, the 3-headed animal that Hagrid had mentioned in a conversation in October that Harry had stored and never mentioned he was storing, was asleep. All 3 heads. Harp music coming from somewhere, fading, the enchantment not quite dissipated. Someone played it to sleep, Hermione said. Quirrell, Harry said. Come on. The trapdoor was open. He looked down it. Darkness and the smell of earth. Harry, Hermione said. He looked at her. Your plan is still to go down there. Yes. Even though, Hermione. He met her eyes. I know what's down there. I know the protections. I have an advantage that Quirrell doesn't know about, which is that Dumbledore told me everything. He paused. And the fragment in my scar is not just a liability here. It's a connection. Voldemort can't approach me directly without consequences I can read better than he can anticipate. She looked at him for a long moment with the expression that meant she was making a decision she'd already made but was acknowledging the weight of it. We come with you as far as we're useful, she said. When we stop being useful, we go back and get help. Agreed, Harry said. Ron said, I'd just like to note that I'm aware this is probably going to be awful. Probably, Harry agreed. Right, Ron said. Let's go. The Devil's Snare was not a problem because Hermione knew it theoretically and Harry had worked with living enchanted plants since he was 6 and had developed a specific bodily sense for when vegetation was hostile versus helpful, which Neville had told him was rare and which Harry had always filed as another thing Griphook's education had provided that wasn't in any standard curriculum. He talked to it the way he'd learned to talk to resistant magic, not commanding, but reasoning, which was a concept that sounded absurd applied to a plant and worked with perfect reliability applied to one. It loosened. They dropped through. The flying keys were Ron's, entirely. He saw the pattern in them that he saw in chess, which was combinatorial and spatial, and directed Harry to the right key with a certainty that brooked no argument and was correct. Harry caught it on the broomstick with the easy precision of someone who has been flying since October, and the door opened. The chess board was also Ron's, and this one was Sirius. The scale of it was the first thing. The pieces were as tall as Harry, carved from black and white stone with the specific detail of someone who'd put true craft into them, and the board was 40 feet across. Ron looked at it the way Harry had seen him look at nothing else in a year, with complete absorption and the specific confidence of someone in their element. "I can do this," Ron said. "But I need you both to listen to me exactly." "Tell us where to go," Harry said. "You're bishops," Ron said. "Hermione, you're a rook, there, far left." "Harry," he studied the board. "You're a knight. Third from the end." "Ron," Hermione said. "I know," Ron said. "I need to be taken." "There's another way." "No there isn't," Ron said, with the flat certainty of someone who has seen the full board. "I have to be taken. And you need to know something before I do this." He looked at Harry directly. "Whatever's down there, you can handle it. I've watched you handle things all year and you never once looked worried, and I don't think that's because nothing worried you. I think it's because you were prepared." He paused. "So go be prepared at it." Harry looked at him for a moment. "Ron. I know. Don't be sentimental." "I was going to say thank you," Harry said. "For the whole year. Not just this." Ron's ears went red. "Yeah," he said gruffly. "Same. Now get on your square before I reconsider." The game took 4 moves. Ron was taken hard. The queen came down with enough force to make Hermione make a sound she immediately controlled, but he was alive, which Harry confirmed before he moved one more step, checking his breathing, his pulse, the way his fingers were still loosely curled even unconscious. Alive and intact and going to be furious when he woke up that someone had to carry him to the hospital wing. The door on the other side of the board was ahead of them. Harry looked at Hermione. "This is where you stop being more useful down here than up there," he said. She looked at him with an expression that was several things compressed into one moment, argument and acceptance and the specific affection of someone who is only letting you go because they trust you and not because they're not afraid. "Go find McGonagall," Harry said. "Tell her everything. She needs to know so she can go around the outer way and arrive from the other direction. The Olary, send a full update to Gringotts as well." He handed her the emergency parchment. "Ragnarok's instruction address is at the top." She took it. "Harry." "I know," he said. "You don't know what I was going to say." "I know enough," he said, and smiled, the real one, briefly. "Go." She went back across the board, careful and fast, and Harry turned to the door and went through. The potions room was cold and lit by blue flames that didn't flicker, 7 bottles arranged on the central table with a logic puzzle rolled in a frame above them, Snape's writing on the parchment. Harry read it in 40 seconds flat. The logic was clean and elegant. Snape's mind had always had the quality of a very sharp tool, and even his puzzles were beautiful in that functional way. He identified the 2 relevant bottles, drank the one that would let him forward, and left the other on the table for whoever came behind him. He pushed through the black flame and into the final chamber. The mirror of Ariste was there. He hadn't expected the mirror. He'd known about the protections, Dumbledore had listed them, and they matched what he'd encountered, but the presence of the mirror here, in the final chamber, was something new, added after their conversation, which meant Dumbledore had moved it deliberately. He understood why in approximately 3 seconds, because the mirror's principle, showing you what you desired most, was itself a protection if what you desired was different from your official purpose. Quirrell was at the mirror. He was standing in front of it with his hands pressed flat against the frame, and his expression was the unveiled version of what Harry had been watching all year from underneath the nervous performance: focused, hungry, frustrated. He was trying to get the stone out of the mirror and the mirror was not cooperating. He didn't turn immediately. Harry stayed near the door and assessed the room, the exits, the distance to the mirror, the specific geometry of where Quirrell was standing and where Harry would need to be. "I wondered when you'd come down," Quirrell said, still not turning. His voice was different without the stutter, cleaner, colder, a different person's cadences entirely. "I heard the chess pieces. You won the board faster than I did." He paused. "That Weasley boy is cleverer than he appears." "Most people are," Harry said. Quirrell turned. His face was the same face Harry had looked at across classrooms for a year, but with the performance gone it was just a face being used by something else. The turban was there. The presence behind the eyes was fully forward now, not glimpsed beneath a stutter but present and looking, and the scar's reaction was immediate and intense, not painful, but enormous, like standing too close to a fire. Harry's occlumency architecture was fully engaged. The room he'd built around the fragment was sealed. The fragment was pulling at the seams of it, not with panic, but with recognition, like a piece of something reaching toward the rest of itself. He kept the room sealed. "Harry Potter," Quirrell said, and the voice underneath the voice was the one from the scar, larger than one throat should carry, ancient in its fury, carrying the specific cold of someone for whom death had been an intimacy. "You are not what I expected." "I know," Harry said. "Most people aren't expecting me either." "You know about the scar?" "Not a question." "Yes." "You know what it contains?" "Yes." Quirrell tilted his head. It was Voldemort's gesture. Harry understood, Quirrell's neck at an angle that wasn't natural. "And you're not afraid?" "I'm not afraid of a fragment," Harry said. "You're incomplete. You've been incomplete for 10 years. That's most of my life." He took 2 steps forward, not threatening, just moving, and Quirrell tracked him with both sets of attention, his own eyes and whatever was looking through them. "What I'm interested in," Harry said, "is the stone." "Then we want the same thing," Quirrell said. "We want it for different reasons," Harry said. "You want it because you need a body and you need power and you need to rebuild what you lost. I want it because it shouldn't be in your hands." He paused. "Those are different wants." Quirrell's expression shifted. "You think you can prevent me?" "I'm going to try," Harry said. "But I'm also genuinely curious about something before anything else happens." He stopped about 12 feet from Quirrell and looked at him steadily. "You killed my parents. Specifically, you went to Godric's Hollow yourself. You didn't send anyone. Why?" Something moved across Quirrell's face, the older thing, Voldemort's response, a pause that carried a quality of being asked something unexpected. "The Potters were exceptional. James Potter could have been, in another world," the voice broke off. "I went myself because they deserved that acknowledgement." "That's a monstrous way to pay respect," Harry said. "Most power is," Quirrell said, and the conversation had taken on a quality that neither of them had entirely planned, 2 intelligences meeting each other across a terrible gap and finding the exchange unexpectedly real. "My mother stopped you," Harry said. "Your mother did something I had not encountered in 40 years of magic," the voice said, through Quirrell's throat. "I have thought about it for 10 years. The precise mechanics. The absolute completeness of the sacrifice. I do not say this to comfort you, I say it because it is the most significant magical event I witnessed in the 20th century and I was the one it destroyed." A pause. "She was brilliant." "I know," Harry said, and his voice was even, held steady by everything Sirius had built and Remus had taught in 10 years of choosing the right things in the right order. "She knew you couldn't stop her. And she was right." The temperature in the room had changed. He was close enough now to see the mirror's surface from the angle Quirrell had been standing at, and what he saw in it was clear: himself, holding the stone, not using it. The desire wasn't to use it. The desire was to keep it safe. And apparently that was the desire that worked, because even as he watched, the mirror shifted, and he felt something drop into his pocket, actual weight, actual warmth, the stone moving from the mirror's interior to the pocket of someone who wanted to hold it and nothing else. Quirrell felt it happen. His face changed. "Give it to me," he said, and the voice was stripped of its earlier quality, down to its essential nature, which was old and hungry and furious. "No," Harry said. Quirrell moved. Not with a wand, with his hands, reaching, and the room's magic shifted as Voldemort drove Quirrell forward with more force than one body should carry, and Harry sidestepped and pulled his wand and cast, not the combat sequences Voss had drilled into him but something specific, something he'd thought about in the months of preparation. He cast a full Protego, not a standard shield, but the expanded version he'd worked out with Remus over the winter, the one that pushed rather than just blocked, which he'd understood at 10.5 while reading about reflective enchantment theory, and which Remus had tested with him 3 times and which worked by converting incoming force into outward pressure. Quirrell hit it at speed and went back hard. The collision where Harry's magic met Quirrell's was visible, a crack of light, white gold on one side and something darker on the other, and the darker side screamed. Not Quirrell. The other thing. The fragment in Harry's scar lurched in its room like a dog hearing a familiar voice, and Harry slammed the architecture down harder and held. Quirrell was on the floor. He was trying to get up and his hands, the hands that had touched Harry's magic, were burned. Not from fire. The protective ward's residue, Lily's sacrifice echoing forward through 10 years, still there, still specific, still absolutely complete. "It still works," Harry said, understanding something new about it. "The ward. It's in me, not just on me. Every time you touch me it costs you." Quirrell looked up at him from the floor with Voldemort's eyes in his face, and for a moment the thing that looked out was not angry. It was something else. The specific expression of someone measuring a distance they hadn't accounted for. "You prepared for this," the voice said. "Yes," Harry said. "For how long?" "Most of my life," Harry said. "Sirius started the day after you killed my parents." "Black," the voice said, and something old and precise moved through it, something that was almost recognition. "I underestimated Black. He was, I always thought, reckless. Reactive. He was," Harry said. "He isn't anymore." He looked at Quirrell, at the body of a man being consumed by something that had been consuming things for 40 years, and felt something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite mercy but was in the neighborhood of both. "Let him go," Harry said. "I cannot," the voice said, and for the first time it sounded like something close to true. "There is not enough of me left to exist without a vessel." "Then you have a problem," Harry said. "Because this vessel is burning up, and the only other vessel option in this room is me, and I'm not a viable option for reasons you've just felt yourself." Quirrell convulsed. The burns were spreading, not visibly but magically, the ward's residue working inward from every point of contact with Harry's magic. His face was gray. His breathing was audible. "The Horcrux," the voice said, Voldemort's voice, dropping the pretense entirely. "In your scar. You know about it." "Yes." "Then you know that I cannot be finished while it exists. That while it exists, you carry me." "I know that too," Harry said. "I've known for 2 years. We're working on it." A pause that carried a strange quality, almost disconcerted. "Working on it." The Goblin historical records have 3 documented cases of non-lethal Horcrux removal, Harry said. "We've been researching the methodology since I was 9. Ragnarok is the most qualified practitioner of the relevant magic in the current world, and he's agreed to attempt the procedure when I'm old enough to undergo it safely." He looked at the thing in Quirrell's body with the clear, patient gaze that was entirely his own, not his father's nor his mother's, but the thing he'd become in 10 years underground with people who loved him and an education that had given him the vocabulary for every room in his own head. I'm not your Horcrux. You made me into something by accident and I've been managing it, and soon I'll be rid of it. That's all it is. You are extraordinary, the voice said, and it was the most naked thing Harry had heard from it, no strategy in it, just the honest observation of something very old meeting something unexpected. I had good help, Harry said. Then Quirrell screamed, genuinely screamed, Quirrell's own voice finally, his own terror, and the thing that had been in him came loose. Harry felt it in the scar, a tearing sensation that was brief and sharp, and the room filled for 1 second with something that had no physical form but pressed against the edges of the space, cold and vast and reaching, and then it was gone. Not destroyed. Dispersed. What was left in the room was Quirrell, crumpling to the floor, and the stone worm in Harry's pocket, and the mirror standing behind them showing, now, nothing at all, just the room, just Harry, just the ordinary image of a boy standing in a chamber underground with his wand in his hand and his heart working hard in his chest. He stood there for a moment and breathed. Then he checked Quirrell's pulse, there, faint, the body still alive without its passenger, and he sent a lumos up to the ceiling and looked around the room and thought, all right. Dumbledore arrived 11 minutes later, through the outer entrance, which confirmed the route Harry had hypothesized in November. He came in moving fast and stopped when he saw the room, Quirrell on the floor, Harry standing, the mirror blank and the stone presumably held. He looked at Harry for a long moment. Are you hurt? He said. No, Harry said. Dumbledore came across the room and looked at Quirrell, checking pulse and breathing with the efficiency of someone who has dealt with magical situations before and does not panic at them. He will survive, he said. Barely. He looked up at Harry. He will need significant care. What he carried has been in him for, he stopped. Too long. I told it to let him go, Harry said. It doesn't work like that usually, Dumbledore said, carefully. I know. But usually the person it's talking to is trying to stop it rather than negotiating with it, and those are different conversations. Harry paused. I think it was more honest with me than it's been with anyone since it started losing. I think being genuinely answered rather than just feared surprised it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The expression on his face was the one Harry had glimpsed in the tea shop 11 months ago, stripped of layering, just the thing underneath, which was a man who had been carrying the weight of this war for 30 years and had just watched a 10-year-old boy do something he hadn't thought possible without dying. The stone, Dumbledore said. Harry reached into his pocket and held it out. It sat in his palm, red and small and warm, and Dumbledore looked at it with the expression of someone looking at something that has cost a great deal. Nicholas, Dumbledore said, meaning Flamel. I will need to speak with him. He already knows, Harry said. Ragnarok's network. He was informed when the breach of the vault was confirmed. He paused. He's not angry. He said, Ragnarok relayed this, that he's been alive long enough to know that some things end when they end, and that's not always a tragedy. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. How old are you? He said. 11, Harry said. Of course, Dumbledore said, and took the stone carefully. He woke in the hospital wing to Sirius. He hadn't known he'd lost consciousness. There was a gap between standing in the chamber and being horizontal in a very white bed with sunlight coming through the windows and Sirius in the chair beside him, and the gap was several hours according to the clock and apparently involved Madame Pomfrey doing several things that left him feeling like he'd been thoroughly repaired. The fragment was the first thing Harry said. Still there, Sirius said. But Ragnarok says it's significantly weakened. The contact with the dispersed, whatever just came out of Quirrell, destabilized it. He says the timeline for removal has moved forward considerably. Good, Harry said. You scared about 10 years off me, Sirius said. Not angry. Just honest. I sent the message through Ragnarok. I know. I got it and then got on the motorbike and arrived in Hogsmeade 2 hours after you'd already handled it, which was simultaneously a relief and deeply anticlimactic. He leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees. Tell me what happened. So Harry told him, lying in the hospital wing bed, the full account: Quirrell, the mirror, the conversation, Voldemort's dispersal, what had been said. Sirius listened the way he listened to important things, with his full, undivided attention and no interruption. When Harry finished, Sirius was quiet for a moment. He said your mum was brilliant, Harry said. She was, Sirius said simply. Brightest person I ever knew. And James would have given anything to have been in that room with you. I know, Harry said. I thought about him, actually. When Quirrell moved, James's instinct was straight through. I went sideways. Different methods, same result. He paused. I think I'm more like Mum, tactically. You're both of them, Sirius said. Completely. He sat back in the chair. Dumbledore's been in twice. He said, and he said to tell you he said this, that you handled it better than he would have at 11. He would have handled it better at 11 than most people would at 50, Harry said. That's not as small a compliment as it sounds. He also said the Ministry is going to want a formal statement. Of course they are, Harry said. And that the story as it reaches the Prophet will be edited. Protected. He doesn't want the details of what Voldemort tried to do fully public yet. Harry thought about this. I'll talk to Ragnarok before I give any Ministry statement, he said. The way the official narrative gets framed matters. Already thinking about it, Sirius said, with a warmth in his voice that was pride dressed as observation. When can I leave the hospital wing? Pomfrey says tomorrow if you rest today. I'll rest, Harry said. On the condition that you tell me about the Ministry's formal response to Peter Pettigrew's second confirmed sighting. Voss mentioned it in his last briefing and the details were light. I'm not briefing you in the hospital wing. Sirius. You were unconscious 6 hours ago. I'm not unconscious now, Harry pointed out. And resting doesn't preclude listening. Sirius looked at him with an expression that had been present, in various forms, for 10 years, exasperated and completely helpless against it, the specific surrender of someone who has spent a decade raising someone too much like all the best people he'd ever loved. Pettigrew was confirmed in Edinburgh, Sirius said. Voss followed him to a safe house and we have a positive identification from 2 independent witnesses. The formal warrant has been issued. He'll run, Harry said. He always runs. But there are fewer places to run to now. Sirius met his eyes. He'll answer for it, Harry. I swear it. I know, Harry said. And he did know. The knowledge was as solid and load-bearing as the stone of the vaults, built the same way, from the same materials, patience, preparation, the absolute determination of people who had chosen not to let a wrong thing go unanswered. He looked at the ceiling of the hospital wing, which was white and unremarkable, and thought about the year. Hermione and Ron. Neville in the common room with his herbology essay. Snape's cramped annotations. Fawkes landing on his shoulder. The flying. The chessboard and Ron going down with the specific bravery of someone who sees what's needed and does it without drama. The mirror, and his parents standing beside his reflection in the dark. The chamber, and a conversation with the thing that had killed them, and the discovery that even Voldemort could be surprised. Next year, Harry said. What about it? He'll come back, Harry said. Not immediately. The dispersal will take time to recover from, and without the stone he doesn't have a path to a body that doesn't involve another person. He paused. Pettigrew is his most loyal remaining servant. If he gets to Pettigrew, we get to Pettigrew first, Sirius said. Yes, Harry said. We need to accelerate that. He turned his head to look at Sirius in the chair, and it was one of those moments where the year compressed, the hospital wing sunlight, the familiar face, the 10 years of everything that had led here. "Thank you," Harry said. Sirius looked at him. "For what specifically?" "For the choice you made," Harry said. "In the nursery. You could have gone after Peter." "I know. You didn't." "No," Sirius said. "That was," Harry paused, looking for the right word, finding it, everything. Sirius didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at Harry with the expression he had when the feeling was too large for the space available, which happened sometimes, and when it did he usually went quiet rather than trying to fit it into a smaller container. "Your mom and dad would be so proud of you," he said finally, and it was quiet and completely true and needed no qualification. Harry held it for a moment. Let it be what it was. "I know," he said. "I think they are." The end-of-year feast was 3 days later, and Harry arrived to find the Great Hall decorated in green and silver, which meant Slytherin had won the House Cup on points, which was fine. Harry's points had gone elsewhere this year, to Hermione's academic record and Neville's herbology prize and the fact that Ron Weasley had been given a special award for services to the school for the chessboard, which was the correct decision and which Ron was handling with the specific embarrassed dignity of someone not used to this kind of recognition. Dumbledore stood at the end-of-year feast and said several things, and then he said that he wished to award some last-minute points that might, he acknowledged, with perfect composure, alter the current standings. He awarded points to Ron and Hermione and Harry and Neville with the careful reasoning of someone who has thought about what each action actually meant and rewarded the right things, and the House Cup moved to Gryffindor and the hall went loud. Harry sat through the noise and ate his food and talked to Ron, who was describing in comprehensive tactical detail the choices he'd made on the chessboard, and to Hermione, who was already talking about what she planned to read over the summer, and to Neville, who had received his award from Dumbledore with an expression Harry intended to remember for a long time. At the staff table, Snape caught his eye once. Not warmly, that would never be Snape's register, but with the particular acknowledgement of someone who has assessed a colleague. A fractional nod. Harry returned it. They would do this again next year, and the year after, and the dynamic would stay what it was, uncomfortable, genuine, and occasionally extraordinary. Dumbledore caught his eye as well, from the center of the staff table, and what passed between them was something that had developed over a year of careful, honest work. Not trust exactly, not yet, the accounting wasn't quite right for trust yet. But the beginning of it. The architecture laid. King's Cross was its own kind of loud. The Hogwarts Express pulled in at 11, and the platform was full of families, and Harry stepped off the train with his trunk and his owl cage and the stuffed stag in his jacket pocket and walked through the crowd toward the barrier with Hermione on his left and Ron on his right and Neville slightly behind, which was the configuration they'd settled into somewhere around November and maintained without discussion because it was comfortable and it worked. Sirius was on the other side of the barrier. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, slightly apart from the crowd of waiting parents, and when Harry came through the barrier he looked up and his expression did the thing it did when he wasn't controlling it, the relief and the pride and the other things that didn't fit in small words. Harry walked toward him and then Sirius covered the remaining distance and they met in the middle of the Muggle half of King's Cross Station, and people flowed around them, and Harry said, "I'm all right." "I know," Sirius said. "I can see that. The fragment is weakened. Ragnarok wants to see you next week." "Good." Harry looked up at him. "Peter?" "Still working on it," Sirius said. "But the net is tightening." "And the motorbike?" Sirius's expression shifted. "What about it? Can we take it home?" "We are not riding from King's Cross to," Sirius looked at him. At the completely level, patient, specific expression of someone who has been underground and then been at Hogwarts for a year and would very much like to be in the open air moving fast. "Yes," he said. "Fine. Yes." Harry smiled, the real one, the one that was his father's shape and his own substance. Hermione was standing a few feet back, her parents just behind her, two Muggle dentists who had sent their daughter to a school of magic with the incredible bravery of people who simply trusted her judgment, and Harry turned to her and said, "Letters this summer." "Obviously," she said. "I have a reading list." "Send it." "It's very long." "Send it anyway." She rolled her eyes, which she did when she was pleased. Her mother was looking at Harry with the expression Muggle parents often had when they worked out who he was, and Harry met her eyes and said, "She's the best student in our year." By a considerable margin, and watched Hermione's expression go through three things rapidly before settling on dignified gratitude. Ron was being absorbed into a tide of red hair, his mother, enormous and warm, his brothers in various configurations, a small girl with a fierce expression who Harry was told was Ginny, who looked at him with the bright directness of someone who has no interest in being starstruck and a great deal of interest in everything else. Neville was with his grandmother, a formidable woman in a large hat who assessed Harry with the frankness of someone who has heard quite a bit about him over the year and is making her own determination. She said, "My grandson speaks highly of you," in a tone that made it clear this was a significant statement. "He's excellent company," Harry said. "And the best herbology student I've ever seen." He meant it completely. She looked at him for a moment. "You're very different from what I expected," she said. "So I've been told," Harry said pleasantly. The motorbike went north and west, out of London and into open country, and the summer spread out below them, fields going gold and green, the specific British patchwork of hedges and roads and small villages that had been there for longer than the magical world had bothered keeping records. Harry sat behind Sirius on the motorbike with his trunk shrunk to pocket size and the wind doing what it always did to his hair, and thought about nothing in particular, which was a different kind of thinking and one he'd learned to value. The scar was quiet. The fragment was there, present, weakened, contained, but the room he'd built around it was holding, and when the time came to remove it properly, they would remove it, and that would be that. Below them, Britain moved. Above them, the summer sky was the specific bright blue of early June, enormous and full and open, and Sirius said something over the wind that Harry couldn't quite hear, and Harry leaned forward and said, "What?" and Sirius laughed, too loud, entirely unguarded, the laugh of someone who had found something genuinely worth it, and said, "I said we should think about next year." "I've been thinking about it since February," Harry said. "Of course you have," Sirius said. "Remus should apply for the defense position," Harry said. "Quirrell is gone and the position is open, and Remus is better qualified than anyone Dumbledore is likely to find on short notice, and Dumbledore owes me some goodwill at this point." "The condition," Sirius said. "The monthly. I've been doing the Wolfsbane research since April," Harry said. "Remus doesn't know that yet. I wanted to have something concrete before I mentioned it." He paused. "Snape knows the Wolfsbane potion better than anyone at Hogwarts. I'm going to ask him to teach me the advanced version this summer." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "You worked all of this out?" "It seemed worth doing," Harry said simply. Below them a river caught the sun, bright for a moment and gone. The motorbike moved through clean air, and the day was long and full of it, and Harry Blackpotter was 11 years old and had handled Voldemort's first serious return attempt and was already planning the next year with the calm purpose of someone who had been raised to understand that preparation was the only honest response to a world that would keep requiring things of you. He was not the boy in the cupboard. He had never been the boy in the cupboard. He was the boy from the vaults, raised in gold and goblin kind, taught by patience and love and 10 years of extraordinary stubborn commitment to the idea that he deserved to know who he was and what he could do. He was Harry Blackpotter, and the war was not over, and he was more ready for what came next than anything that came next was ready for him. The motorbike went higher, into the full light of the summer, and kept going.